I don't hear anything.
Um,
Now
we're
I,
re- we're recording.
ah, let me turn that off. Thank you.
Recording and do all the standard stuff. Where are we? Share screen. All right, welcome everyone to our first meeting of the new year. We have two items on the agenda for tonight. One is discussion of a fund transfer requested by the IT department, and the other is a budget forecast presentation and discussion led by Melissa Goff. As always, we will start with public comment. If there's any member of the public who would like to weigh in on either of the topics on the agenda tonight, you can drop your name in the chat and we'll call on you. I don't see any names dropping in the chat,
No,
which means we can turn it over to Fung to explain her financial request.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
So thank you for taking on this request. So basically, I am requesting to transfer $10,000 from the leased equipment account 5A 00036 to the education and training account for staff upskill training, given technology changes quite drastically, and we really need to keep up our staff's technical skills and their professional development. So that's the request, and thank you for your consideration.
All right, so we'll open it up to questions or comments from the committee, but I'll start. Is there specific training that you have already in mind for the funds that you're requesting?
There are a few. Primarily, they are focused on the systems that we currently have. So to improve on those, both in the network and infrastructure division, and also the digital services division. So there are a lot of existing systems that we need to continue to train staff on, and also emerging technologies as well. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Other questions or comments?
David Mark, do you have a question?
No, but I could use a refresher on how to use the chat.
Okay.
Well, it is different. It is different on my version anyway.
It is different. It's annoying. It's easier to miss messages now, which maybe that's a feature.
So I think at some point Zoom updated the chat feature. So you now have the everyone group, and then you have new chat, and you can chat with individuals. So sometimes it's confusing if you're used to the old ways. Yeah. They always come up with new features. Yeah. To trick us.
Perry Grossman.
Yeah, thank you for that training on that. Any losses with the leases? What are you giving up by moving that money away? Does that impinge you in any way?
Yeah, thank you, Perry. That's a really good question. So at the moment, we don't have any losses because we are still benefiting from the ARPA fund that we have received during COVID that helped us with some of the equipment refreshment. But we are gonna be due for refreshment cycle again. So this year, we're not giving up as anything that we have planned for. So I really want to take this rare opportunity to get some staff training going.
Okay, thank you.
Just to follow up on that, because you're talking about, because we're coming up on the budget season, are you anticipating adjusting the training budget for the next fiscal year
Well, I
accordingly?
think we are, I think we have some cuts and given the financial situation, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not expecting that to gonna be increased. Actually, we have a $3,000 cut in training if the override doesn't pass, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Harry
Sorry, Darren.
Bors,
Sure. So I know a lot of our software, I mean, not just for the town, but generally, has essentially gone to subscription services rather than you buy it and you own it. As part of those services, do they provide ongoing training, or is that an additional cost, or is this more for training for, say, cross-platform applications?
Well, good question. So a lot of the subscription, one thing about the going to the subscription model is that we're seeing a huge, a much larger increase in software cost, number one. The training, they are available training, so they are some online training available, but these are more, I guess, higher level technical training that's still needed. So we do take advantage of all the online training that's offered to us, but we still need more higher level training as well.
Okay, thank you.
Michael Berger,
Yes, thank you. So I have a question about the type of training. In particular, what kind of applications, and does any of it involve focused on artificial intelligence or security, or what's the main focus of
So,
the training?
so security definitely, and artificial intelligence. We are leveraging some of the training, as Harry actually mentioned, that some of the subscriptions we do have online training available. So for artificial intelligence, so for instance, we have 3 test groups going on right now. One is Microsoft Copilot, because we have the Microsoft tenant. One is Zoom AI Companion, which is the platform you're using, and there is an AI companion that helps summarize the meeting. So we have a test group for that, and then we have a test group for Canva AI. So we are leveraging those available training for that. But the training I'm requesting are more, security focused, application system focused, and our infrastructure system focused. So it's a higher level training. Yeah.
Thank you.
Carlos Ruduejo,
Thanks, Harry. Thank you, Ving. How is the Civic Plus doing? And is part of the training going to be for the different departments to sort of standardize it?
Yeah, so Civic Plus system is going well. I don't want to announce because it hasn't made it official yet, so I'm not going to talk about it. But we actually got an award. So Civic Plus right now, the town website is doing well. Our web developer, James Pouliot, is doing a fantastic job. He's been training all the editors, and he's also staying on top of all the accessibility features. As you guys know, there's a new standard coming out and everybody has to comply. And we're ahead of many communities. We have worked on a list of goals every year with other departments on improving accessibility. So every year he goes through that list. And we have a tool that we use along with Civic Plus. And actually it's a tool we've got before Civic Plus bought it, because they're a really good tool. So we use that to scan our pages and find accessibility errors. And he's been going through a lot of that. It's very tedious work. But it's, he's really staying on top of it. So Civic Plus right now, it's going well. We have recently also migrated the police domain to the police.brooklynma.gov. So it's all .gov domain rather than the police site used to be .com. So that's what the security, all the, security advice that we've been receiving, that we should move to the .gov, platform. So, so that's all consolidated. So far, I think it's going well. But if you, I'd love to hear from you. If there are any issues you encounter, James is right on top of it. So feel free to reach out to James. His contact information is on the website, or reach out to me as well. Yeah.
Yeah, the only suggestion I would have is that, and I don't know if at what stage the standard is imposed or not, but some of the listings on the calendar are better than others. Some of them just have way too much information on the title page or on the title itself. So when you get the emails and all that, there's just all this irrelevant information. And it would be just good to standardize that and to show what should be on it so that all the listings are pretty much the same. But I think it's a great improvement from the past.
Great, thank you. And could you send me or James some examples so we can look into it? Okay, thank you.
Janice Kahn.
Hi, Fung. Thanks for all you do for the town. So I have a question. You said that James works with the editors of the departments. I'm just wondering how the departmental websites get updated, because some of them seem to do really well in updating information and others, I think, not as current. And I'm just wondering, how you interface with the people in the department who have to change their website. Each department has a designee. Right.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Lisa.
So that's really it. So every department has an editor, which a designee to update the content. So James really trains them on the use of the technology. He doesn't update the content for them, but he updates some of them on the front page, certain things, but departmental pages are maintained by the departmental designee. Yeah.
Okay, so then that will lead to less standardization, really, because some are probably more on top of it than others, no?
There may be some variations, some are updated more, but the format of the page and all of that should be standardized. So if you see anything that's very specific, send it to us and we'll look into it.
Okay, great. I do think there's been great improvements in the look of the department websites. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. And I also want to put the plug into the town administrator's office. The rebranding, I think, really also helped as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, Dennis?
All right, then I guess I'll take a motion to approve the IT department's fiscal year 26 fund transfer of $10,000 from their leased equipment account to their education training account with the associated account numbers from the memo from IT director.
So moved.
Second.
All right, let me bring up my screen so we can vote. Michael Berger,
Yes.
Harry Bors,
Yes.
Cliff Brown,
Yes.
Anthony Buono.
Don't
Maybe
think
he's not here. Elise Kucher Stone,
Yes.
John Doggett,
Yes.
Harry Friedman,
Yes.
David Mark Goldstein,
Yes.
Neil Gordon,
Yes.
Susan Granoff,
Yes.
Perry Grossman,
Yes.
Kelly Hardebeck,
Yes.
Elisa Jonas. Is she here?
She is here.
All right, we'll come back to her. Janice Kahn,
Yes.
Brian Ladd,
Yes.
Alec Lebovitz,
Yes.
Carol Levin. I
She
know
is
she's
also here.
All right. Liz Linder,
Yes.
Pam Lodish,
Not here.
Jocelyn Murphy,
Yes. Thank you, Fang.
Thank you,
Danelle
Jocelyn.
O'Neill,
Yes.
Linda Olson-Pelkey,
Yes.
Fran Perler,
Yes.
David Paula,
Yes.
Carlos Reduejo,
Yes.
Margaret Robotham,
Don't think she's here.
Lee Selwyn,
Yes.
Yes,
Christine
Margaret is
Westfall.
here.
Oh.
Margaret voted yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
I
Yes.
can now.
And
Oh, okay, okay,
Dennis,
perfect. Yes.
Dennis Carol Levin had votes yes in the chat.
Okay, and Chris Westfall
Yes.
and Elisa Jonas.
She is muted, but she is here.
Okay, well, by a vote of 25 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions, we're going to approve that fund transfer. Thank you, Fung.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
All right, Melissa, are you here?
I am.
All right, I've made you a co-host. You can present to your heart's content. We should get some expectations in order. Are you prepared to be interrupted as you're presenting, or do you want to have designated breaks for questions?
So I don't mind interruptions as I'm presenting. I would say that I'm also delegating some of this to Charlie, and
Okay,
he's currently covering at the select board right now. We have replaced Tiffany Oliva. Melanie Otska is the new assistant town administrator for our operations. She's coming to us from Southborough. People at Southborough, I'm going to have to make nice with at the annual meeting for the MMA to smooth things over. But we're very excited to have her start. Charlie's helping with the public comment piece, and then he will hop over.
okay,
Given that, I know that there were a couple of updates that we also wanted to talk with the committee about. One being the fire overtime, that Chief Sullivan is here for that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, you're gonna have to wait for Charlie as well, because it's really based off of his memo that we want to have that discussion. He's coming, but DPW is also here to give an update on where they are with the issues going on at the transfer station. I think that
Okay.
update might be briefer, and to save them having to suffer through my presentation, you may want to talk to DPW first, and then we can jump into things.
Okay. Commissioner Shute, are you going to present, or do you have someone to delegate to?
Good evening. Yes, Erin Chute, Commissioner of Public Works, Kevin Johnson, Deputy Commissioner of Operations, and Director of Highway and Sanitation is here as well. So I will just start and kind of provide a timeline and information about what's going on at the transfer station. Kevin, at the end, if there's some things that you want to add, and then we can answer questions. And thank you, Melissa. I appreciate that. Okay, so in August 2025, the concrete tipping floor at the town's transfer station at 815 Newton Street experienced a structural failure that rendered the facility unsafe and unusable. Engineering assessments confirmed that the slab and the conditions beneath it are compromised, and the building can no longer safely support daily solid waste operations. And as a result, normal transfer station operations can't resume without a significant interim intervention. And I'll just note that the facility is a critical municipal asset that's directly involves and impacts our solid waste costs, service reliability, and long-term operational flexibility for the town. So to say the tipping floor is where solid waste comes in every day. It is offloaded. It is then all consolidated, put in large containers, and then shipped to the waste to energy disposal facilities. And what this prevents us from having to do is to have multiple trucks all drive 40 plus miles to a remote site. So with that added driving time, with 1 to 3 hours waits on site to actually get to dispose of those facilities and then return to their respective locations. So it provides us with a real competitive advantage. And what is the tipping floor where we do this? Below that is another room. And, you know, this building is built kind of like a bunker, but a hole is currently in that floor, and that's the sort of the structural problem that we're dealing with. So following that failure, Department of Public Works worked with the building department, our engineering consultants, and Massachusetts DEP to assess the conditions and evaluate possible paths forward. Some temporary repair options were explored, including steel plating and structural infill beneath the slab. And while technically feasible, those approaches would not address the underlying condition of the building and would require additional regulatory steps and still leave the town needing an interim facility when the building is ultimately demolished and rebuilt. There are issues around asbestos and lead with this building, and the structural and the steel plate really caused some operational challenges as well. So what we're proposing at this point, and we've looked at some different options, is a temporary enclosed prefabricated transfer station structure that we would locate within the non-cap portion of the rear landfill at the Newton Street site. This approach allows the town to restore safe and compliant operations without making major short-term investments in a building that's already at the end of its useful life. The interim structure is a prefab structure, but we're speccing it to be both durable and adaptable, so that once a permanent transfer station is constructed, it can be repurposed for other DPW operational needs, such as containerized operations or salt storage, ensuring continued value beyond its initial use. And we're currently advancing cost refinement, value engineering to ensure the solution's fiscally responsible, constructible, and aligned with the town's long-term facilities strategy. So overall, really our next step is we are going to refine the costs, and ultimately, and in parallel, we're preparing to initiate a comprehensive feasibility study of DPW facilities. This includes the transfer station operation, and this will help inform the scope, sequencing, and long-term strategy for the demolition and reconstruction of a permanent transfer station. And that funding was actually approved at town meeting last year for the feasibility study. I think I'll just note that the building itself, this is an important asset for the town. It was built in 1948, and it was constructed as an incinerator and stump wood grinding facility. In 78, the incinerator in Woodhog was decommissioned, and the building was converted to a municipal solid waste transfer station, which is incredibly unique to have for a municipality, and other communities are certainly envious of the flexibility that provides for us. In 2005, the front and back landfills were capped. So we closed and capped those landfills. And at the time, there was a plan to demolish and rebuild a new transfer station when the stack was taken down, but the town didn't have the funds at the time. So it has long been understood that the transfer station itself needed and needs to be replaced. And we're just at a point right now where it's kind of pushing us to need to move quickly in order to both have a temporary solution that will keep our operations running smoothly and in compliance with DEP, but also preparing for what would be a replacement in the future. I think the last thing I'll add is that DEP has been incredible to work with, and we currently have sort of two interim operations that they have now approved. One is what's currently in place, and I think Janice has been out there and seen this, but in our bays, so we have storage bays that are in essence open on the sides but covered, and so we're currently using that to dump and consolidate the trash and haul off site. And it's not ideal because it's not sort of fully contained. And so they've approved that as a temporary measure, but they also have just provided us sort of a temporary type of approval and concept of this idea of having a enclosed temporary facility that would be in that same general area where we hold the household hazardous waste collection. And that would be containerized. It also would have doors so that the vehicles could pull through and dump, which also eliminates backup noise. So we're thinking about noise, we're thinking about odor, we're thinking about litter, flowing and all of those things, and clearly would be working with the neighborhood to share some of these ideas as well. So thank you.
Can I just add one thing? I think we originally were contemplating reserve fund as the funding source for this, but the costs have grown in such a way that we're now looking at potentially a budget amendment, or potentially folding it into the fiscal 27 CIP, or a combination of all three. So we're still, we're trying to value engineer and see if we can bring it down. And then, hopefully we'll have a better sense of what we're looking at in terms of funding.
That was going to be my first question. Questions or comments from the committee?
Lee Selwyn.
Yeah, hi. I have this recollection from the conversation we had about the whole outsourcing issue last spring, that something like only about 20 or 25% of the total use of the floor and of the transfer station is actually associated with Brookline trash. The rest is contractors dropping stuff off that they're collecting from other towns. And first, can you confirm my recollection, because it's been 6-8 months since I talked about this?
Yeah. So the town generally uses about 30 to 35 tons per day, and we are permitted for up to 135 tons per day. So while the contractor doesn't max out at that tonnage each day, they do have the capacity to do that.
Okay. And so here's my question. First off, has the unavailability of this affected what we have to pay for trash collection to the contractor right now?
No, they've worked with us on all the interim measures, so they have not charged us anything additional, even though some of the on-site litter pickup for them has been more because we have an open kind of dumping area right now. So it's been more onerous for them, but we've had no impact in our contract or costs.
As of now. Okay, and then the other question I have is, to the extent that something between maybe 3 and 4 times as much usage was being made for non-Brookline purposes, has that additional usage in any material way contributed to the deterioration and ultimate failure? In other words, I know we were not being particularly compensated for making this available, and are we now bearing the cost because of the additional burden that was being placed on that facility?
That isn't the way I would think about it. I think that we in the contract are saying that we have a transfer station that is safe and permitted by DEP and appropriate for this type of operation. So we're saying that we're providing a space for this operation. In terms of additional wear and tear, I think that it's really on us, at least per the contract, to have a facility that meets the needs of the contract. So there is no clause for wear and tear in their contract.
I'm not talking about the current contract, but this has been going on for some time, correct?
Mm-hmm. It's a repurposed function.
I don't know what that means.
if I can just mention also that we did do some precautionary repairs because of some wear and tear on the floor prior to the additional tonnage being added into one of the contracts in previous years. We did redo the floor that was failing at the time, that back in 2017. And we were at the point with the building department in discussions in late winter of 2023, early 2024. We put out a study to have the building weather tight, so it's, you know, so the rain wouldn't come in and cause extra weight to the trash, which we pay by the ton. And part of that study was also to repair to look at the structural of the floor and we make repairs to it. But the failure came before we could get to it.
Okay, I'm still not sure you understood my question, or maybe I didn't understand the answer.
I think you understood it. I just don't have an answer for it.
I mean,
And
here's my concern. I mean, to sort of put it simply, we have, you know, whatever, we have not been charging explicitly for this additional use. We basically, it was some sort of quid pro quo, I suppose, in terms of the way we negotiated some of the contracts for hauling and the like. But I guess my concern is that, you know, to whatever extent that additional use for non-Brookline purposes has shortened the life of this facility and or required potential additional capital investment, perhaps we have not been valuing it correctly. That's my concern. In other words, we're incurring costs that were perhaps caused by usage that was not for the direct benefit of Brookline.
so I think just for everyone to bear this in mind, I think could be a perspective or a conclusion. But Brookline will be paid $1 million over 5 years just for the contractor to use the transfer station. And Brookline is saving money on its overall collection by being able to leverage use of the transfer station. I think there's that piece.
Will that payment continue when the transfer station is no longer available? I mean,
With this temporary structure, yes.
It will still continue.
If we have a temporary structure that's permitted by the DEP, as they said they would do, to function as a transfer station, absolutely.
Okay, and it's still being used for the same quantity of non-Brookline trash.
Yes, DEP will continue to provide the same permit that we currently have. But I really think the situation here is it's a 1948 building that has received no investment over time, because there's so many other needs. There's so many other needs. There have been big school projects, other things the town has wanted to do that are far more flashy than a transfer station. But here we are, and this is an important asset for the town. And I think it's a situation where it's time to replace this building that hasn't had the investment, and it's not because of the tipping floor. There's been really very little investment in the building overall.
Okay, thank you.
David Pollock.
Thank you. Hi, Aaron. My question really goes to the feasibility study that I assume has been completed. Is that the case?
Oh, we're just getting that scope out and proposals in.
So my question is really about the reach and sort of what you outlined for a building program was to position a new temporary building that will in fact be a short life permanent building. You'll continue to use it for whatever useful life you get out of it, and then replacing the existing building with a new facility, which may have slightly different features or be bigger, or who knows, but in the same spot. And so my question is sort of narrowly, will your feasibility study look broadly at the utilization of the entire parcel in terms of truck flow and programming and purposes, with a kind of, a questioning of where the buildings should go and whether the layout is optimal now, or whether, with the opportunity of building 2 new buildings, should they be configured otherwise? And then secondarily, is there any aspect of your feasibility study that's going to look more broadly at programming for the parcel and maybe a range of town interests? Not that it shouldn't just be a DPW yard, but is there any questioning of the purposes of the land? And I think Lee's line of questioning also sort of does inform that, in the sense that if we have this wonderful facility that can manage much more capacity than the town needs, a feasibility study today would be the moment to say, should we consider a smaller facility without all that extra capacity if there's another use for the land, or whatever? And I don't have I'm not suggesting any answers. It's just, while you're doing this study, I would think that the select board and the town administrator would want to know those things, as would the advisory committee.
So I think that's a great question. The answer is, well, the feasibility study itself was scoped prior to this structural failure in the floor, and so the feasibility study is to look at the 4 remote DPW facilities: the water and sewer facility, the Lars Anderson Maintenance Yard, the Municipal Service Center, and the transfer station in full DPW yard at the rear transfer station, and to look at all of our storage, to look at our functions, to look at our vehicles, to look at our operations, look at our flow, look at our staff, and what are the sort of short-term, medium-term, long-term needs of those respective buildings and facilities, because just like the transfer station has been overlooked for many years, so have some of these other buildings. Lars, for example, is in really tough shape, and the water and sewer garage, where we have our pumps and we respond to flooding across town, is in a flood zone. And as part of our hazard mitigation plan, we're wondering, is that the right place for this function for the town as we think about climate change, et cetera? So really, the feasibility study is going to look at all of these functions, potential opportunities for consolidation, and we'll be looking, David, at the rear landfill in terms of truck flow, operations, maximizing the space, et cetera. We're not looking at other town functions, and there are reasons why the type of operations that we have up there really need to be separate and discrete from other recreational uses. But we will be looking at optimization, and I think I'll just add, the one thing that's unique about the siting of the transfer station is its footprint needs to stay the same per DEP. So it's not, we cannot move that one particular function from where it is. We can't expand the footprint of the transfer station itself per the permit that we kind of are grandfathered and have through the state. So, but that's fine, given its location. There's a lot of opportunity for circulation around that, and I think thinking about the rest of that site.
Thank you. I think that was informative.
Thank you, Janice Kahn.
Yes, thanks, Harry, and thank you, Erin, for that update. It's very helpful to hear what you are doing. So for most people on this screen, the transfer station is theoretical. For my neighborhood, it is part of our neighborhood. So Erin's absolutely right. We do see what's going on there, and so I want a little bit of clarity. First of all, for those who don't know, the landfill had to be capped, and it is now a beautiful meadow, and it's part of the conservation land, and it came out just. It's a wonderful place to walk. So I invite you in all seasons to go and walk there. So that's another feature of our neighborhood. So I want to get back to the transfer station. You're absolutely right. The building was in great disrepair. The windows were all broken by kids throwing rocks and sneaking into this building that was really falling apart and frankly dangerous to be at. So it definitely is, this is one of the consequences of deferred maintenance, is that, now we cannot defer anymore, and it needs to be taken care of. It needs to be done right. What I want to have a better understanding of is this temporary structure. Are you planning to build it sort of where you're dumping now, on that part of the site?
Part of the site, but a little bit more in the center, so that we can still go back to using those
So you can have the
bays. But it would be more in the, as you know, there's a sort of space where household hazardous waste collection is. It would be in that location where the vehicles could drive in and then
in and out.
Circle out. Yeah.
Okay. And what happens then to the household hazardous waste that we bring? Is that going to be moved then to a different part of the site?
Yes. Yep. And Kevin and I are thinking about that and the best sort of circulation and the way to separate, residents from the other operations. So we're talking about an approach for that, but that would remain on site.
Okay. And I hope that you reach out to the community writ large about other things that could be used there. There are swap shops and stuff, other municipalities allow people to bring things to exchange, to swap, to whatever. That's beyond the scope. So what you're saying is that the new building will be in the exact same place it is now? Yes?
You mean down the road, like a
down the road,
permanent building? Yes, that's what we're hearing from DEP, is that the site is specifically, that location is specifically permitted for that function. So yes.
And the temporary structure that you're envisioning, is that then going to be moved to a different part of this larger site, or?
I think that this is something where it'll be part of the feasibility and thinking about, where that could be used either at that location or even at the municipal service center, because the sort of wooden structure at the salt shed is, that's probably 25 years old as well.
Yeah, no, I hope you do the feasibility sooner rather than later. I think it's something that definitely needs to be done. Okay, so then, when you get around to building or this temporary structure, I hope you'll let us know so that we can be prepared for when to expect construction and all of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So Harry, before we go on to other questions, I want to remind that our meeting tonight is largely focused on the status of the budget for the upcoming fiscal year, and obviously fire overtime and the unexpected consequences of unexpected expenses related to the transfer station and the like are all going to be important variables in producing that budget. But citing and traffic concerns related to the transportation and the like, we should take up at a different time. So let's talk more about the big picture and the finances if we can. Thank you.
Carlos Ruduejo.
Thanks, Harry. And thanks, Erin, for this information. I went to drop off hazardous waste earlier this year, and I was sort of mesmerized by the building because there was something about that building that called my attention. And so I did some research, and I guess it's an Isidore Richmond building, 1954, and it received the Award of Merit for Industrial Design from the American Institute of Architects when it was designed. So it was at one point a beautiful building. It just seems like it never was maintained the way it should have been maintained. So I guess I have a couple questions. One of them is, how come it hasn't been on the CIP list for, I don't know, the last 20 years or so?
I've never received any funding request related to this building, so this predates me, the decision not to make the investment.
Okay. The second question, I guess, is, so from what I've heard, there was an operator, and with the machinery that they worked, they sort of made a hole in the slab. Is that operator a town employee, or is that a Casella employee?
Well, they didn't make a hole, like a hole
Okay.
opened up in the floor, and so they didn't make the hole. But no, this is the operator that is loading the trash.
And that's a town employee?
It's not a town employee.
Sorry, what was that?
That is not a town employee.
So it was a Casella employee.
That's part of the function, of
Okay.
managing the transfer station operations.
Which I guess brings me to my point that I raised in town meeting when I asked about the fee for the transfer station over the $1 million you talked about. And then I said, well, what will happen if something, if they hit the building, or if they poke the hole, or if they damage the building in some way, who's going to be responsible? And I guess now we know. I think, this gives us a great opportunity.
They have impacted like the garage door in the past with someone that came in, and they did fix that. But
right.
This is not to be attributed to one person and one operation.
No, and I'm not saying that person is at fault. It's just, I guess I'm talking about that when we think about these agreements and usage of facilities, there is a time, and I think the time has come, where the town will have to spend a few $1 million replacing this building. And maybe it's not I guess when it's more than a municipal facility, when it's also part of a private enterprise, I have sometimes trouble wrapping my head around it, of who's paying what for what business, like who's making money out of what, and all that, and if the whole investment is coming in, is just for the town, or are we also investing or helping Casella's operation work because of who's going to end up paying it? And I don't know the answer, and I'm sure you don't know the answer right now, but I feel like this, with new EPA regulations compared to 1954, I'm sure that building this kind of facility is not going to be a cheap situation. But I do actually urge you that that you maybe we take a little bit longer to build the actual facility, and we integrate the master plan that you just talked about, DPW locations, into much more into it, because I think you're really onto something of consolidating, or at least looking at all the DPW locations. And now that we know that this building has to be replaced, unfortunately, that we sort of think about it very holistically. And my last comment is just, deferred maintenance has its cost. I just alerted Charlie the other day that a couple of lintels fell off the facade of Runco, which is only 14 years old. And then they went to look at it, and they realized that because it hadn't been maintained, a lot of the sealant between the wall and the lintels had failed. So now water started getting behind the wall, and it's actually the damage is much more extensive than just the one lintel that fell. It's actually almost the whole wall. So I think we really need to take deferred maintenance, especially exterior envelope, really seriously, both when we design buildings or have them built by, new buildings, like, how much of that are we causing? And then also the existing buildings, because at the end, we're paying more than we should. But thank you again, Erin.
Thank you.
Lisa Jonas.
Hi, sorry I couldn't respond earlier on my yes vote. I was in the car and I couldn't figure out how to turn my audio on. Erin, I have to say, garbage can be such an interesting topic. I've never really realized how much you can talk about with garbage. So I took my first real tour of the transfer station a few months ago. Not so much to see the transfer station, but to see that beautiful land behind the transfer station. But it also got me to look at the transfer station. And I guess it hadn't registered with me how large a space it is. But I was also surprised at the number of Casella trucks taking over that area. And so first of all, I'm wondering how many of those Casella trucks are there because they are also going to other towns, and then they're sitting at the transfer station once they've finished their work in all those other towns. And I'm just wondering how much of the space is taken up by Casella using that land for that purpose, if in fact that is what it's being used for. And I'm wondering, do you have any estimates of the amount of space of the transfer station that currently could be used more, both with and without Casella having all its trucks there? And the other question I do have, having been in the back of the transfer station where that green space is, there's the other, oh boy, forgot the name. The area that is to absorb the overflow from any excess water leakage. There's already one on one side. I went with an engineer to the other side, and he thought that it might be excess capacity. And I'm wondering if that's something the feasibility study will be looking at. And even now, if you have any sense of what you think about that, whether that's excess capacity or not.
So there are a couple things in there. I'll maybe start with excess capacity, because I think you're talking about the stormwater management and
Yes,
those bays that were constructed. So those were all constructed, permitted, and approved as part of the cap. And so I don't think they were sort of over engineered. It is not intended, like revisiting the cap design is not intended to be part of the feasibility study. It's really looking at the functions, the space, the operations, the buildings. Glad to have a conversation about that though, and pull in our conservation folks and engineers if there's a space and opportunity, and maybe so if there's something that we could look at, but I would say not specifically as part of this study. We have a sort of minimum amount of money to actually just do this feasibility study, which is supposed to be kind of a higher level concept to pull that together. I think so I'm not sure when you were at the transfer station, but Casella largely actually stays in a pretty confined area, and they're in and out. Now they're coming over into a part of the transfer station, I mean, the rear landfill area where they never were in the public works yard. And normally there's like some activity and then it really lightens up. So there's sort of periods of activity and then not as much with Casella specifically. So I guess I'm not really sure, but I do think that we'll be looking at that very specifically as part of the feasibility study and operational kind of use. But I think everyone also needs to think about our public works yard at the rear landfill supports seasonal operations. So we're managing yard waste for 8 months out of the year. In the winter, our snow dump is at the rear landfill. You don't see that now, but in 2015, you could have gotten ski tickets for our snow dump. We have the Christmas trees that are up. So many things sort of come in and go out, and we use it for different functions throughout the year. So it looks different on Tuesdays from 8 to 12 doing the household hazardous waste collection. It also looks different. So we need to make sure that we're maintaining the type of flexibility that we need to support all of the town operations and functions. We have the water and sewer laydown area, where we have certain pipes for emergency response operations. So it's an important area for our operations.
So the Casella trucks that I saw there, is that area now used by Casella to store all their trucks when they're not being used to go to other towns to collect their? No. And I guess I'm just wondering, we have the DPW site at Lars Anderson, which is this eyesore, and is there going to be room to move that there? I guess that's going to be all part of the feasibility study, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Danelle O'Neill.
Thank you, Harry. I'll be quick, Dennis, I promise. So I just have a couple of questions. So I guess this main thing has to do with the timing of the request, okay? And the question was asked on, like, when do you pay, well, I guess, Melissa, when do you pay attention to facilities that are well overdue with maintenance, the deferred maintenance? Or, I mean, how many facilities do we have that were built in the 50s that haven't been looked at, or hasn't been a request to look at for so many years? I'm just curious about that. So I mean, I think the issue is I'm happy about I've had my stories of the DPW days of having to clean that transfer station, the leaf blowing, and the whole nine. It's huge. You could do a lot with that land there, and I'm happy you said that it's specifically used. That it's a specific use for it. So I guess, like, how do we get things bumped up on the list other than having certain people request it? You know what I mean? Like, because the timing, the timing sucks, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I would just say the first instance of a request from DPW to look at this facility was the study that Erin requested, and it was funded. It was funded. So, that's essentially the response that she got when she, advocated to look at the building.
And I do think it's important, though, that Public Works had to rebuild the transfer station when the landfill was closed, and that just, because of cost didn't happen. And that was a big community process, and I think folks understand that. I think Kevin's also been working with the building department to put in annual requests for windows and you know,
Roofing. Yeah.
the roofing, things like that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danelle. Linda Olson-Pelkey.
Thanks, Harry. Hi, Aaron. I just have a simple question. So you said in the beginning that what we're doing now to still operate the transfer of the trash is very temporary, but that you've been speaking to DEP and they've kind of blessed that. I'm just wondering, is that accurate so far, what I've said?
Well, it's more than that. We actually have a temporary permit
Okay,
for the current operation.
great. So have they given you a hard and fast deadline on that? Have they said, we're going to give this to you, but it's, time limited, or are they more flexible than that?
It is time limited, but we need to do monthly updates with them in terms of our progress, but we can ask for extensions. Here's where we are in our process, and we'd like an extension through this period of time for the following reasons. They've,
So
they've been working with us.
Great. So what is everybody's expectation now about time for what's happening now to continue? Like a year or much less than that?
I think that within 8 months to 8 to 10 months that there would be this temporary enclosed structure on site. And then at that point, we're operating and they know we'll be working on a feasibility study. And so I think then we still would be doing updates to let them know where we are. But they would like us to get to a place where our operations have closed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dennis, that's it on the transfer station.
All right. Melissa, you said there was an update on the fire department overtime.
Yes, we had sent a memo in November. I don't think we had convened after that memo was sent. So Charlie is here and Chief Sullivan is here to kind of discuss with the advisory committee any reactions from that memo, any questions that the committee may have, and any other update that they would like to provide as well.
Charlie.
Sure. Thank you, Dennis. So Charlie Young, Assistant Town Administrator for Finance. I don't have a presentation for you tonight because I wasn't sure exactly what advisory would be looking for, but I'll just quickly bullet. Back in July, we appeared before you, I think before mostly this same group, to request reserve fund transfers for both police and fire. We were asked to provide an update on figures for overtime this fiscal year as of September, which we did. In short, fire is projected to have a very similar deficit to the one they did last year of around 900,000, and police, after making some changes to discretionary overtime and hiring some folks, is actually projected to be much lower in like the low six figures or even below $100,000 range as far as being over budget. It's possible they will land on budget. We discussed the subjects at length with you all, and the memo is designed to provide substantial detail. So I'm really just here to answer questions. But in particular, I'll just say we had some indication from some advisory members that they're less willing as the years go on with these fire overtime deficits to approve reserve fund transfers. And so we're just here tonight partly to get a reaction from you folks on whether this earlier communication that we're providing is sufficient to continue the practice we've been doing, or if staff need to consider other ways to close the gap or reduce the deficit that we're looking at. So with that, I'll throw it to Chief Sullivan in case he has anything to offer or add.
Thank you, Charlie. John Sullivan, Fire Chief, Emergency Management Director. I don't have anything to add with regard to the budget. We are in negotiations with the union as we speak with regard to what avenues that we have to be able to close the deficit. Should we have to do that if the flavor of the advisory committee and or the select board wishes us to go in that direction. So that's where we stand right now.
So I have a comment as someone who raised this before. It's my understanding, if my memory serves correctly, that to get a reserve fund transfer, it has to be extraordinary and or unanticipated. And if the fire department overtime budget you're projecting really isn't all that different, it's $1 million+ bucks in the red. At this point in time, that's neither extraordinary, it's quite ordinary, and it's not unanticipated. It's actually predictable. So I would have a difficult time doing a reserve fund transfer given the standards for a reserve fund transfer. I don't know how we make up this money, but if the fire department is running overtime deficits of $1 million+ every single year, year after year after year, then either a budget adjustment has to be made to give them more money, or one of the firehouses may have to close, or, you got to do something. But the reserve fund transfer, I think, is becoming increasingly an unrealistic expectation.
Thanks, Harry. And I just want to respond to say, we made the comment back in July that we would welcome a policy from advisory on what constitutes extraordinary and unforeseen. I just respond to you, Harry, that we've done a reserve fund transfer multiple years in a row. So this is a new issue you're raising. It kind of goes against the practice we have been doing. But we're here tonight to ask you that very question and to get that very response from you. And you've laid out the issues very clearly and accurately, by the way. This will result in either a reserve fund transfer, a budget amendment at town meeting to cobble money together, likely stripping it away from other areas in the budget, or some change in operations. And the chief is here to talk about what that might look like if needed. But we hear that from you, and that's why we're here tonight.
Thank you. Margaret.
Harry, 100% agree with you. And I think Harry and others will know more about what the standard operating procedure is around reserve funding or a budget amendment. One, Charlie, I'm really glad to hear that police at least looks like it's on track. So I know that you're not single-handedly managing that, but just want to take the dubs when we can get them. And then my second question is for, I think, Officer Sullivan. To Harry's point around costs, do you have any idea going forward what you think a more appropriate budget will be? I'm asking just so that as we're thinking about FY27 and future years, what would be a more appropriate number just to prevent having this conversation another year?
Yes, thank you. I presented to this committee several years ago. So 6 years ago, I think it was now, if not 7, that the budget that was being delivered to the fire department from the administration was short on the overtime. After having been here a couple of years and analyzing the costs, we were level funded for several years. Finally came back several years ago and gave the administration a formula, which is used in the Metro Chiefs area for kind of estimating overtime, which is 10% of the salary costs. So right now, our salary line item in the fire department is about 18 million. So it would be 1.8 million. At the time, we were at 750,000, so it wasn't surprising that we were, in the area of 800,000 to 900,000 in the red, and that's where we've kind of historically been for the last several years. We've kind of built up to that as pay increases have gone through and no significant changes. The town did make an effort 2 years ago, 2 budgets ago, realizing that the overtime is not adequately funded for the responsibilities and the contractual obligations that we have. The the plan, so to speak, at that time was to add $300,000 in fiscal 25, 300,000 in fiscal 26, 300,000 in fiscal 27, to reduce the reserve fund transfers and to also make up that deficit. Unfortunately, in 26, there was no capacity to be able to do that second 300,000. So right now, my overtime budget is 300,000 more than it was. But 300,000 doesn't realize $300,000 in savings. It doesn't actually work out that way. It's more in the lines of 200,000 in savings. So either way, you know, we've recognized it, we've anticipated it, and we've planned for it, and we just have not been able to make up that in the budget as yet. As many of you may know, we're in front of the efficiency committee, and we'll be looking for an override from the voters to kind of make that up, and so it doesn't impact operations. Whether that goes through or not is yet to be seen, but
John,
that's
just to summarize, what I'm hearing is you're recommending that budget go up 10% in lockstep with base comp. Is that, am I hearing that right, or did I mishear?
that the overtime is approximately 10% of the salary line items in the budget, which is right now, it's upwards of 19 million now. So from last year's budget to this year's budget, we're at about 19 million. And so that it'd be 1.9 million. And if you do the math, we got $1 million this year. We're asking you for 900,000. We'd come in just about on budget, plus or minus.
And I think last time when we spoke in the summer, you had indicated that a lot of this overtime was, and you just remind me because I'm not, you're obviously more familiar with this than me. I think you had mentioned there was like a law passed in Massachusetts around recognizing, you had mentioned, you know, firefighters are at increased like prevalence or incidence of getting certain like lung conditions. And I think you had mentioned there's a law passed in Massachusetts that you could when an officer would go out to like get, you know, doctor's appointments, that was considered overtime. Am I on the right track as to what's driving the overtime, or am I misremembering?
No, there's multiple factors that are driving the overtime. Minimum staffing is one of them. And, you know, we had that debate last year, and it was soundly rejected. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do any, you know, anything that reflects a decrease in operations. But at the same time, I have a fiscal responsibility to come in on budget. So I don't really have a lot of choices left anymore. One of the factors is an increase in injured on duty claims that we have because of the cancer presumption now. We've had on average, 3 firefighters out with the new presumptive claims. They would be out anyway. They just wouldn't be on IOD. They would be out sick leave in the past. So it's not as if it changes the landscape. Right now, we have 15 members out injured on duty. So that is 10% of our workforce. We have 153 firefighters, 54 firefighters on the books, so 15 out, that's 10%. That does not include the attrition that we have of 5 firefighters. So, you know, that's 20, that's an average of 5 per group that to start the day. I'm down 5 members per group every day. So minimum staffing is 29, maximum staffing is 35. I've got a window of two people that can take vacation, sick leave, family leave, jury duty, union leave, you name it. There's multiple leaves that we're contractually obligated to give. So Charlie and I have the statistics. We're happy to share those statistics with you as to what, you know, our rate of overtime is per shift. We've been tracking that for 2 years now, and it's been in the memo that you can see the trends. It is just what the numbers say.
Could I offer another response here as well?
Sure, go
ahead, Charlie.
Thank you. So I would encourage folks to check out the memo that we put out in September. It's the Q1 brief. it contains a lot of detail on the questions that were just asked. So for example, it actually includes a breakdown of different nearby communities' overtime budgets percent of their overall personnel budget. Right now, as of FY26, Brookline's is just under 6% of its, so its overtime budget is just about 6% of its overall personnel budget. I just want to point out, though, that in FY25, the actual expenses were about 11.6% of the overall personnel budget, which means that we would still have ended up with some kind of deficit had we budgeted at that 10% metric. And I also want to add that the last two memos we have put out have highlighted that although we are putting money into the overtime budget, we put $300,000 into it, leave use by the collective bargaining unit has increased year over year, is projected to be up 3% this year. And so there is a chance that costs will continue to rise even after putting some money into the budget. This is not to say that we shouldn't put money into the budget. This is just my fair warning to you that this is what I'm observing in the figures. To the extent that we add money to the budget, it will reduce the need to have a conversation about reserve fund transfers. But it's quite possible that the figures continue to trend in that direction.
Thank you. Alec Lebovitz?
Thanks, Harry. And Chief Sullivan raised, I think, the crux of what I wanted to get at, which is this debate is very similar to the one that we had last summer. And in particular, the debate around potential service reductions, at least I think the result we saw from that was very strong opposition from the community, from town meeting. And that led us to a different policy solution, which was the rollout of this new shift differential, which is meant to get at not just the increased leave, but specifically the patterns of leave that are occurring, primarily concentrated around weekends, holiday shifts, that are driving a lot of these OT costs. So I wanted to ask Charlie, in the projection that you've given us this evening of the $900,000, does that include any projected impact from the new shift differential and how we expect that to impact OT utilization?
That is a great question, Alec, and Chief. I'm just trying to recall off the top of my head when the
weekend shift differential comes in as of July 1st, 2026. So that has not been implemented yet. So it will be next fiscal year.
Right. So that would be in place for fiscal year 2027. Okay.
Along with the added incentive of an increased sick leave buyout at retirement, which is designed to have folks use less sick leave because there would be an incentivization at the end to be able to get an increased buyout.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. And to be clear, this 900,000, this is the projected overtime needs for fiscal year 26. Is that correct? Okay, great. So I will say to Harry's point, and Harry's absolutely right in his reading of the law and the advisory committee's oversight responsibility in providing or approving these reserve fund transfers. I do think the fact that there is a policy intervention, a new policy intervention in the mix, is important to keep in mind here. And particularly as we move towards FY27, I'd be very interested from the town administration and the fire department if we could get a sense of monetarily what we think the impact of the shift differential might be on overtime costs, and certainly on overtime cost growth for that year. But I also think that provides some rationale for proceeding as we have done in the last few years with not necessarily scheduling all of expected overtime costs into the actual budget and reviewing essentially at year end as we go to close the books. I imagine it'll be hard to estimate the actual impact, given this is a behavioral mechanism and we don't really know how the workforce is going to respond to it. But I certainly have high hopes for this intervention. I think if it doesn't yield benefits on overtime cost growth, we're going to need to have a much more unpleasant and focused conversation about the path forward. But at least in the interim, I'm very curious to see how this plays out. And if, reconciling the books on overtime costs at the end of the year gives us more flexibility to do that, I think that's worth a consideration as well.
So I would like to say what, or add on to that slightly differently. And I think in response to Charlie's original question about what the guidance looks like, I think Alec actually hit or his language touches on what I think is an important part of the answer, which is that when a town or a department is making constructive steps to reduce costs, to improve performance, to improve their predictions of along whatever dimension that's in question, and those projections are debated, vetted, and turn out to be wrong. That's unexpected and and unusual. And when the department doesn't do that, it's not it's not unexpected or unusual. And I think that's what Alec was trying to point out, is that as we make substantive changes and those changes don't have the effect that we hope for, that's a reason I think to come back to this committee and try to cover deficits. But I think that, to Alec's point, it will be extremely important in the fiscal 27 budget to have the best possible estimates of what the impact of the new policies are going to be.
You said it much more eloquently than I could, Dennis, so thank you.
Charlie, I'll hit you. I'm going to let Janice go first, and then you can respond to her and to what other point you want to make. Janice Kahn.
Yeah. Although I'm wondering, because mine is a totally different issue. If Charlie has something really relevant to this, I think Charlie should speak first.
So I just wanted to respond to Alec and say we did do that calculation as part of the collective bargaining process. We were thinking about that. I do want to note, we have at least, I think, one member of the unit on the call tonight, and they expressed to us that they did not see the weekend differential necessarily as a cost saving measure, but more as recognition of the weekend work by firefighters. But we did think this through. And as has been raised in prior memos, weekend leave tends to be about 40% higher than midweek leave, which is a substantially higher number. Even sick leave is 40% higher some years than midweek sick leave. And so there is substantial savings to be had there. And so we looked at this and thought, if this weekend differential were to save one overtime shift per weekend, that's just one shift, which is a very conservative estimate, it would save us about $50,000 over the course of a year. If it were to save 3 overtime shifts per weekend, which would be, say, a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday, that would save $170,000 a year. If it were to save 6 overtime shifts per weekend, which we think is very unlikely, 2 per day, would be $350,000 savings. So it could be very substantial if folks are willing to come in to get their weekend differential. It's not a significant dollar amount, as Chief Sullivan and I discussed. But it has the potential to save us, at minimum, I think $50,000 and up to $350,000.
So Janice, you wind this up.
All right, I'm clean up. So, these contractual incentives, I think, are one way to approach the deficit. I want to look at it from another point of view. I'd like a little bit better understanding about the 15 firefighters who are out on IOD. And is there some sort of preventive action that we can take on that end so we don't have the staffing shortages? Yeah.
So thank you, Janice. So we analyze all injuries, fireground injuries and station injuries for any training needs that would need to be done. We've had several, for instance, that were, getting on and off the truck under various circumstances, whether it was at emergency calls or just an inane just routine call, if you will, and you step out onto the pavement and there's a patch of ice underneath, and you take a fall from that. So our training division has scheduled and done multiple training sessions with our firefighters to address the more common injuries. And certainly one of the things that we are building into the station renovations is an increased emphasis on our fitness equipment and dedicated fitness rooms in order to be able to offer a higher level, if you will, of opportunity for firefighters when they're on duty to utilize that equipment and to maintain their fitness levels. Along with that, we're working very diligently with the HR department to try to move our firefighters into the treatment regimens that will reduce their time off as quickly as possible. A lot of that is dependent on the physicians and the firefighters themselves and making those determinations, especially with orthopedic injuries. There's a lot of emphasis on physical therapy, on injections, so we're trying to get MRIs scheduled as quickly as possible so that the extent of an injury can be determined early on, and whether surgical intervention is going to be needed sooner than later, and then trying to drive that those issues into those surgical interventions, and then add the PT on at the end for the recovery phase. But those are decisions that are made at the individual level between the doctor and the patient. So we can only do so much when it comes to those issues, but we're certainly offering those MRIs and those CAT scans earlier, and allowing our firefighters to get those answers as quickly as possible so that they can make the best decisions to move their rehabilitation along. We have negotiated with the union a change in the policy around modified duty, so that we can get folks at least working some portion of their week. It doesn't really reduce the deficit so much because our overtime is really in suppression, and we don't have modified duty in the suppression forces. But you do get productivity out of that firefighter. You're not paying the IOD costs for that. So there is some savings in the IOD line, but again, that is contingent upon the physician with the job descriptions and so on, getting to a point where that firefighter can do modified duty. It's a little disheartening when you have a long-term injury. There's no capacity for a modified duty, and then next Monday they're fit for full duty, and you're left with your hands up in the air and say, well, wasn't there somewhere in between no capacity and fit for full duty that modified duty could have been an option for us? But there's really not much I can do about that. That's a doctor-patient conversation.
Thank you for that complete answer. Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of prevention, so training to prevent injuries and also the fitness. So I'm glad that you're building that into the renovated houses. So good. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Charlie. I think we should move on and turn it over to Melissa for a fiscal year 27 greatest hits presentation.
You're muted, Melissa.
Yep, I got it.
Hey.
Thank you, Dennis. And I appreciate you getting the departments in front of us so that they can, enjoy the rest of their night. And Chaz has also joined us because the select board ended early. So there you go. He'll be helping wrap up the end of the presentation, kind of talking about the components of the override. And Charlie is here, and Lincoln is also here. The three of us will be kind of covering this together. So we presented this to the board in mid-December. I will say that this presentation has been slightly altered. There are some things that have been folded into the forecast since that time. I did notice some corrections I needed to make in fiscal 26, so that has been updated as well. But the overall picture hasn't really changed all that much. The school projection has also been updated and folded into this presentation as well. So this is kind of a summary of the components of the forecast that we have. Our group health costs are the biggest driver of what's happening to the budget in fiscal 27. We have a 12% assumption in fiscal 27. We have a group health insurance consultant that provides us with a lot of information about the market and what we should be assuming for group health costs. I was kind of hoping that in the out years of the forecast, we would have maybe some changing news, but he is telling me that I should be, at least for the next 3 years, assuming a 12% growth in group health. We are also, understanding that ARPA is going away at the end of midway through fiscal 27. And so we have been very careful to try and avoid, to the extent possible, not building things into the ARPA allocation that then would come to roost on the town side. So, with a couple of, we provided a lot of interesting programming through ARPA, and a lot of that is highly desired for continuation. But we really tried to make sure that we, weren't loading on all these staff that then would need to be, dealt with in fiscal 27. So to a certain extent, we were able to kind of avoid that for the most part. I don't know if anyone has kind of tuned into what the Mass Municipal Association has been putting out there in terms of navigating the storm and kind of setting the stage for advocating for more money at the state level, discussions about Prop 2.5 and, how that the state allocation combined with the restraints of Prop 2.5 really are putting municipalities across the board in a lot of fiscal stress. So, I go to meetings and I hear about overrides, I hear about health insurance costs. It's all the same issues in all these different cities and towns. So, this is definitely something that we've been discussing a lot at the municipal level as well. So right now our town deficit is around $2.9 million. We're still continuing to tweak the projections, and when we get the financial plan out, we'll have identified the deficit from where the forecast is, and then we will have a closure plan that will show the reductions that we need to make in order to come into balance. The school deficit is around $13.5 million. Again, there will be some policy issues that we'll be contending with to help bring that number down. In fiscal 26, we had made changes to our CIP assumptions. We'll likely kind of stay where we are in terms of the 6% of prior year net revenue instead of the 6.6, which is what the new policy target was after the last override. And I know that the school department is still refining their projections as well and looking at efficiency. So we're hoping that that number will come down further as well. The cost pressures are, very similar to what we've experienced in the past: collective bargaining, special education, and then benefits as well. So these are some of the assumptions in the forecast. So we have our $2.5 million assumed for new growth. I think in an earlier version of the forecast, I actually had a lower number, but Ted is really doing a lot of good work around personal property. Ted Costigan is our assessor. Was feeling that we could maybe bump that up a little bit more to $2.5 million. And so that is reflected in this revised forecast as well. Currently, state aid is assumed at 1%. Unrestricted general government aid, which is what we call UGA, that's the 1% growth, and then 2.5% growth in Chapter 7, which is education aid. We'll know in a couple of weeks when the governor's budget comes out how we deal with that. I did pay attention to the consensus revenue hearing that was held a few weeks ago with the budget writers at the state, and there really weren't any tea leaves being read that could help us be more optimistic about what we have currently assumed for state aid. So just holding steady with that until a couple of weeks from now when the governor's budget comes out. So on the expenditure side, we are still holding those 6 positions in the police department budget that we had used to fund their contract. I already talked about the group health assumptions. Also just looking at the subscriber numbers that we're currently holding for town and school. I will also say that I have an early projection of group health. It's kind of midway through the year. These costs shift pretty significantly during the year. I'm currently projecting a deficit. But I'm, closely monitoring that number as well and hoping that it comes down to a more manageable level. We had made some assumptions around reduction in staff. And so those are still kind of not really bearing out. So that's part of the reason why we are in a deficit position there as well. For the pensions, we are following our current schedule, which our appropriation increases on the pension side, 7.85%. And Dennis, I should mention that I did say that I could be interrupted with questions, but I can't see anyone. So someone's going to need to shout at me if you're looking to interject as I'm kind of buzzing along these slides.
Nothing yet.
Okay, thank you. So then for collective bargaining, we're currently assuming 1.5% in fiscal 27, and then 2% in fiscals 28 and 29, along with the tail that was voted by town meeting in fiscal 28. So that puts a lot of pressure in fiscal 28 as well. And we'll talk about that at the end when we talk about the components of the override.
Hey, Melissa, can you remind us of the trend in local receipt growth? I don't remember it offhand.
Yep, we'll have slides that go into detail on all the revenue components.
All
so
right.
we can,
Okay.
we'll kind of go
We can
through
wait
that as
then.
well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
And Michael Berger has a question.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. Do these projections assume an override?
No, currently no. So this is our level service budget. That's currently what we're assuming.
Okay. We're talking about the fire department and kind of a continuing expectation of 10% for overtime. And it seems that in our budgeting process for the override, we're assuming every 3 years we have an override. And so we're getting that didn't used to be the case. And I'm wondering if that's kind of in a new paradigm where we're expecting an override to give us the revenue that we need to fund the budget.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of discussion about what other things that could help to basically avoid this 3-year cycle. And I think we've been talking about the fact that our revenues are not growing as fast as our expenses. Group health is a prime example of that. A 12% growth in group health is blowing us out of the water. It basically is consuming most of the additional tax levy that we're getting in fiscal 27. So we've talked about how potential development, new growth might be a way to help kind of change that shift. We've talked about fees and fines potentially. We're exploring that this year as well. The state has proposed a couple of local option taxes that might help us with that as well. But obviously that hasn't moved at the state level either. So there are things that might help make it a little bit better, but it is kind of a circumstance that we're really, kind of stuck with, that, our expenses are just growing, outpacing our revenues year after year.
That's part of my concern in that I'm worried about the sustainability of the town of Brookline. Because we're talking about new development, a lot of it turns out to be not commercial. Our commercial revenue is not growing, and more falls on residential. And I'm just wondering where the town is going. I'm really concerned about
I think it's the service levels that would need to get revisited, Michael, because in the absence of additional revenue, we would really need to revisit the level of service that we provide to the community. And that's really the only other option that we have.
Thank you.
So we're also looking at our OPEB funding schedule. Currently in the forecast, it's assumed that we are following the added 250 every year. We're talking about potentially pausing that again in fiscal 27. But the current forecast is assuming that we are continuing all of our existing policies as well. This slide here, I'm just going to breeze by quickly. You'll have it in your packet so you can read it later on. It just shows kind of the history of the town in terms of some, budget balancing measures that were taken and the override cycle that Michael just alluded to. So this is the big blizzard of numbers that essentially lays out the forecast for the town. And you can see the revenue is very, 3%, 2.8%. And then you can see on the expenditure side, 4.7, 5.2. And ultimately the overall deficit is 13.7, 2.9 of that is town, 10.7 is 2. With some of those CIP policy changes, that'll probably bring it down by another $2 million or so. And we're looking at, refining any of the other estimates that we have as we kind of get closer to the budget as well, to the release of the financial plan as well. This is just a picture that shows that most of our revenue is coming from property tax. So there's a finite cap there as well, unless there is an override. We have local aid, which is, a smaller and smaller piece of the pie. I thought that the MMA did a good job kind of laying out the gap in terms of what UGA provides. And, when you apply inflation to what used to be provided, cities and towns really haven't kept pace with what the state has been seeing in terms of revenue growth. And then you're looking at local receipts is, 7.6% of the budget. So that's really not going to move the needle in terms of solving the problem as well. This just shows where some of the growth in the revenues are coming from, same as the pie chart, but just in the bar level as well. I'm going to chime in and have Lincoln to cover property taxes, and then I'll hop back in after he's done with his 2 slides.
Yeah. Hey, good evening, everyone. Lincoln Heineman, the town's finance director. As Melissa mentioned, this is a slide that speaks to how the property tax, the entire levy across the town is built up each year. So looking at the green column, 2027, we take the prior year levy, apply the 2.5% across the board, again, across all taxpayers in town. As Melissa mentioned, the new growth figure was bumped up a little bit. We have had now 8 years of new growth above $2.5 million. So, looking at that and seeing that it is possible, to bump up that figure a little bit to capture some of that revenue that does seem to be a little bit more of the new normal. And then the building in of the debt exclusion there, $35.4 million in fiscal year 2027. The next slide, we'll get into the specifics about about the increase in that from fiscal year 2026.
If I could just add one thing on this as well. So right now in the out years of the plan, we don't have any particular development assumptions. So no Waldo Durgan kind of coming online. Obviously there's a proposal for zoning change at this annual town meeting. That is also not assumed in the forecast as well. There's nothing that's kind of percolating in terms of major development that would, cause us to make those adjustments at this point. So really the primary new growth factor in the out years is coming from residential new growth.
But for fiscal year 2027, you still have 22.5 million there rather than the larger number, at least on the screen right now. That's why I'm confused.
So it was at 2.1, and so we've bumped it up to 2.5 based on some of the 3.5.
I thought I heard Lincoln say 2.5 as the number that should be bumped up. That's why
I was saying we're looking at 2.5 million as the new base, as the new baseline expectation, rather than the lower 2.1 million.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of we did have a very positive new growth figure in fiscal year 2026. A pretty significant portion of that was due to new work in personal property. So that is to say equipment in businesses. And that's going out and being aggressive with the new contractor, with our new chief assessor, Ted, who Melissa mentioned, and going out and making sure that we're fairly and fully taxing all personal properties. That's a not insignificant piece of the increase there in 26.
Thank you. Alec Levovitz had a question before we go on to the next slides.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Just very, very briefly. On this slide, so new growth in FY26, 3.56 million. Do we have a sense for what drove new growth in 26 higher than baseline?
So a lot of it was that personal property that we're talking, that I just mentioned.
Gotcha.
We do have the standard, we do have the standard pieces that we're looking at with residential and commercial industrial personal property, but the particularly high figure there, it really is personal property.
And so that personal property tax growth, is that more than 400,000 in FY26?
No, I think the growth was 360 some odd thousand. I'll give you the exact figure, but something
Okay,
like that.
perfect. So the assumption built into that 2.5 is that revenue will be recurring in future years, or is it different private property assessments that will change?
No, so it's now that it's now on the base, we're going to continue this we're intending to continue this investment in personal property and making sure that we're fully taxing all and fairly taxing all personal property in town. But that's now into the base, into the levy. So to the extent, that we see some growth in personal property in fiscal 27 and beyond, that would be new, different personal property.
Got
Does
it.
that
Thanks
answer
so
the
much,
question?
Lincoln.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
perfect.
Thank you. So to briefly talk about the debt exclusions. So again, in the green column there for fiscal 2027, we can see that the primary drivers there, the only drivers for fiscal 27 are the third year of borrowing for the fire station renovations and reconstructions, estimated to be at the borrowing at 18.5 million. And the third, the third and what's projected to be the final Pierce School borrowing. And then you can see in fiscal years 28 and 29, the first years of the projected fourth and fifth year being the projected final borrowing for the fire station renovations and additions. So I'll pass it back, unless there are any further questions about that, pass it back to Melissa to talk about a little more about state aid.
So I think I've pretty much covered state aid in the opening. So this just shows, $26.4 million, a 2% growth assumed in 27, a little bit more optimistic in the out years. Hopeful that, some of the advocacy from the Mass Municipal Association, I would imagine we'd see that more in the out years than in the current year, considering that the report just came out a couple of months ago. Then we have our,
Hang on. So there was a
we
question
have
from Carl. Go ahead, Harry.
Yes, this is a question for Lincoln. Hi, Lincoln. Can you just say a couple words about the last line on that other slide, the 10.1% of the levy?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of the growth from the prior year, or
the significance of that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So right. So that's the total portion of the levy that's attributable to debt excluded from the strictures of Proposition 2.5. I guess I'm not sure what you're driving at, Carl.
Well, what is are there any guidelines, standards, like what's high, what's low, what shouldn't be passed, what number we shouldn't pass?
Sure. Yeah. So we are in the higher percentile of municipalities in Massachusetts with debt as a percent of budget. Certainly, so we are up there, and that's a function of this primarily of the school projects in recent years, and layering that onto the levy.
And do the rating agencies look at that number?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's not if you're asking sort of if there's a concern, there's no concern, I think, inherent in the percentage, certainly, or at least in the percentage that we are at now. If it went higher, I think that might change. But the primary concern from ratings agencies is really more around willingness to pay from voters and historical willingness to pay. So that willingness to pay has been there in the past. Then of course it's up to the voters about whether or not that's there in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to local receipts.
I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Carol, is that, whatever it was, $35 million from debt exclusion, is that excluded from the 2.5% increase in the levy?
Yes.
It gets added on top. So essentially the levy limit is before the debt exclusion, 314 million. And then when you add the debt exclusions, it's 349.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So Then we have our local receipts, which were increasing by 4.3%. Some of that, a lot of that is related to seeing parking meter revenue increase in fiscal 25. And then also some strong activity around local option taxes, but also knowing that, you know, a declining economic environment, we're still watching those accounts pretty closely to make sure that we still feel confident with the numbers that we have there. Still holding back a little bit on interest income because we also know that that environment is changing as well. And most of the other accounts are pretty standard. We did increase our estimate for motor vehicle excise based on the prior year actuals as well. So that is kind of where we are in terms of the local receipts.
Is this where you're going to talk about possible changes to local option taxes, or is that later in the presentation?
So the two areas that they are looking at, I believe, is adding another motor vehicle excise fee for communities, and then also looking at increasing the percentage that of the local option portion, I think, of both meals and hotel motel taxes as well. So until the state passes that, we're not assuming it in the forecast.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Dennis, can I make a quick comment? This is Harry.
Yeah, sure. And Lee also has his fingers raised.
It's more of an observation. This goes back to the state aid slide as well as the local receipt. So when I look at the state aid slide, percentage increase of 2%. When you figure in inflation, that's telling me that this is actually a decrease in real dollars. And even local receipts, it's, you know, it's just a whisper of an increase when you put it in real dollars. And I suspect when we look at some of the things that we have to pay for, that's more than what we consider the general rate of inflation. So in fact, these combined may actually reflect in real dollars a decrease, not an increase, even though we're calling them increases. So I think it's just something to keep in mind.
And if you look at the entirety of the cherry sheet, it likely would be when you consider the assessments that get folded in, and we'll have a slide on the assessments coming up. But, you know, we've seen that experience where we've gotten dinged in our assessments. And then when you kind of combine the two, it's actually a decrease as well. So then we have other available funds. These are reimbursements coming from our enterprise funds, our revolving fund. We have, we've exhausted the host community, the HCA funds, but we do have a new funding source from opioids, from the settlements around a lot of the drug issues that we are dealing with, the opioid crisis. So we have a change in assumption around that as well. School food services, this was something that we were able to budget for in fiscal 26. I'm still looking for an indication from the school department as to whether or not this can be a recurring funding source. So absent that information, I'm assuming that this might be a one-time adjustment. So we'll continue to, you know, discuss that with the schools as well. Just note that there is a drop that you'll see in the out years, and you'll see that in kind of the major slide at the beginning of the presentation as well. All that is reflecting a drop in the pension funding because we'll be fully funded in 2030. And so you do see a slight shift around the growth in the pension line item that does show a little bit drop off, and you'll see it in these figures as well. So free cash. So we are looking at our free cash. Oh, was there a question? Sorry.
Yeah, I had a two-finger. I don't see on the debt exclusion list the Gerald Alston bonding. Is that not a debt exclusion item?
It was not a debt exclusion. It's part of the regular debt service budget.
Okay. And the second question is this now pretty much the debt exclusion maxed out, or are there still more items that are going to crop up over the next year or two as more construction is completed, if any?
I think it really is about the town's appetite for additional projects and whether or not we need a pause given the magnitude of the debt load that we currently have.
There's nothing scheduled that would cause this to increase further.
I am not aware of any additional requests other than, you know, there's been some I've heard some rumblings around Baker, but I don't know whether or not that would be a major renovation, whether it would be a modest renovation, whether or not MSBA would be participating in that. So, I mean, those are very, very early conversations. So I think there's still a lot more that needs to happen
That
around
wasn't
that.
really my question. My question is, all of the debt exclusions that have been previously approved are now
Everything that
fully kicked
authorized,
in.
this
Is
is the
that
last
correct?
of it. This is the last, the whole schedule is built out based on everything that's been authorized.
Okay, that's not it.
Yes. Yep. So this is the allocation estimate for free cash. We haven't had free cash certified yet. We're hoping that that will be happening very shortly. We're currently estimating $23 million, kind of similar level to last year as well. And these are the recommendations for allocation for the town's fiscal policy. So reserve fund is kind of the first bucket. It's 1% of prior year net revenue. So a component of that funding is coming from free cash. So that's where the 892 is coming from. We are still looking to create a unreserved stabilization fund target level that keeps us in good standing with the ratings agencies and trying to be in the mix of our peer communities around AAA rated Moody's communities. So we have a recommendation of $6.3 million in order to achieve that. You'll recall that we've had some recent settlements coming out of the liability fund. The liability fund also has a target of 1% of prior year net revenue. So that $2.1 million is to get us back to the level that we need to in order to achieve that target. Our capital improvement plan looks to have 8.1% of prior year net revenue. After you get the operating revenue to get you to 6.6, you use free cash to get you to 8.1. So that's $5.3 million. Then if there's anything still unallocated, 15% of that balance would go towards the Affordable Housing Trust Fund if the fund is below $5 million, which when I ran my report in December, it was. So I've got $1.2 million going to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And then if there's anything left, we can either revisit the existing buckets or look at one-time trust funds that may need a supplemental appropriation. At this point, we're recommending that the full $7 million go towards the CIP because we've got plenty of funding requests in the CIP as well. Just shows the fund balance.
I actually think there's a couple of questions before we go on. So Elisa and then Carol.
Hi, yeah. I was just going back to the debt exclusion. Do you happen to have any data on what the percentages are for peer communities? How much less than 8.6 or 10% it is? And also, since ours is higher, has there been any analysis of whether the reason is that we've had more projects or whether the projects that we do are more costly than equivalent projects in other communities?
So I'm not familiar with the debt profiles of our peer communities. I think we could probably make a request from our financial advisor to give us some comps that we can provide you. But I do think that, even though this is a high level of debt, I do have to say, I think we've done a lot of it in a low interest rate environment. So I look at communities that have recently, like the Lexington High School, that's a major, major project, and how much more expensive that is. So I do, even though this feels like a lot, I do sometimes think that the timing worked out well for the town as well.
That's good. Yeah.
Shows the overall picture of the fund balance and what we're trying to achieve in terms of the Moody's metrics as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Charlie to
I'm
start.
sorry, can I just ask my follow-up question to what
sorry.
leading the debt exclusion? That's okay.
Sure.
I thought for Fire Station 5, there was an expectation that we were going to need additional money to complete that beyond what we already approved.
So I have basically programmed out the funding that has been authorized. So if there needs to be an additional authorization, I think there are two questions that need to be answered. Is one, can that additional authorization be applied to the debt exclusion? We won't know that answer until we get that request into the state. And also town meeting would need to provide the authorization. And then also, if it's not covered by the debt exclusion, it would be something that would need to be folded into the regular debt plan.
Oh, okay. But that's sort of clarifying what Lee was asking then.
Yes.
That is a project we've committed to that the funding might need to be increased.
But it would require town meeting authorization in order to do that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
And I will say
Yep.
that project is actually in front of the building commission tonight. I will say stations 1 and 4, even with contingency items, are progressing well. Station 5, we're taking a look at. I know the chief's strong desire is that we reconstruct that station. We're supportive of that. And we just have to see, at this juncture, we're hopeful that given strong control over the project that we manage in-house, that we're going to be able to keep those costs as low as possible. But, another conversation that we might have, not this year, not in the next, probably in the next 2 to 3 years, is do we want to do all the fire stations? We said we would do all 5 fire stations. The big question that is outstanding in the community is, do we do Station 7 or do we sell that building? But that's a question that's going to come down the line towards the end of this process. So there may be a question of, is Station 7 worth renovating, or is there an alternative model that we might want to consider that involves selling that property or converting it to another use?
Okay, I'm going to toss the baton to Charlie to pick up the expenditures.
Add a quick follow-up question. I'm assuming that the Fisher Hill property is on the same far horizon that we just that Chaz was just talking about, because it's either CIP or debt exclusion, and it's not shown anywhere right now, correct?
I have an assumption in the out years of $2 million to do some level of assessment. But at this point, it's very TBD.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. We just spent some time talking about revenues, and now we're going to talk a little bit about expenses for several slides. So in FY26, which is the current fiscal year, you have a general fund budget of $419 million. What we're showing you here is that amount broken out by category and percentage. And what we're really trying to highlight here is how little of the budget is discretionary funds. So between salaries and benefits, you have 71.2% of the budget, and then debt service is another 10.5%, and intergovernmental, like your state aid, your non-appropriated costs. After that, there's very little left in discretionary funds. I'll try to take my time on these slides so folks can ask questions. Melissa, next slide. Thank you. This is the fully allocated expenditures pie chart. So what we're doing is taking essentially that same sort of chart you were just looking at by department, and we're allocating all of the costs that are in the town budget but are expended for school purposes or expended for the schools, and shifting it into the education bucket. So this shows the true allocation of costs. And so we're showing you that 57% of the operating budget, almost 58% of the operating budget, is school expenses. And if you would like to see a breakdown of what these costs are, we have a great page in the financial plan under section 2 entitled Town School Split, which has a breakdown of the dollar amounts that are in that education pie piece of the pie.
Hey, Charlie, just as a clarification, though, that chart included school benefits under education?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So for FY27, we're showing you an estimated total increase in expenditures of $31.3 million. As you can see here in the bars shown in millions, that's 10 million of that is being attributed to the schools. 3.3 million of that is being attributed to town departments. That's primarily salaries. It's utility increases. We're seeing a couple of contractual increases next year. It's the new sanitation contract, and there's some assumption for departmental growth. As about the same amount as the school increase at 9.9 million is the category of benefits, which is townwide. And as you can see, it's a substantial increase. A lot of that is in health insurance.
Okay, Charlie.
Yes.
Excuse me. Could we just go back to the allocation of school expenditures?
Sure.
On the prior slide, does that include liability fund expenditures?
Melissa, you may have to jump in here. I believe it
No.
does not in this case, because that is
So
considered.
it only would next year, because what we will be doing is we basically take the report that we provide to DESI, which shows the town expenses on behalf of schools, and we project that into the following year's budget. So to the extent that there were liability expenses that were reported to DESI, those will get projected into the following year's budget.
How does that compare to last year, that total school percentage?
It's pretty similar. It doesn't shift all that substantially.
It's within about 1%, Lee. I think it may have been 58 point or 57 point last year as well.
Okay, but is this based on the number that Melissa suggested, that where schools projecting a $13 million
This is current. This is current year.
Oh,
Lee,
this is
so-
current. Okay, it's
Correct.
not
Yeah,
the-
we're just
okay.
taking a look at the current year budget to give you a picture.
Do you have a
Um,
pie chart for next year yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
It'll be in the financial plan. So in a few weeks, you'll see it.
If you recall, I prepared an animation of these a year or two ago, showing that the school budget was kind of like Pac-Man, would eventually swallow up everything.
Thanks for your questions. All right, let's I think we just moved on to that last one. Go back just for a second, Melissa, to the expenditure summary. Couple quick things. So we're assuming $3.5 million in special appropriations. That's your CIP, and we have $6 million in debt service. That is the Pierce School, fire stations, and roof repairs coming onto the schedule. Okay, next slide.
Charlie,
Go ahead, Carlos.
the school number, that's something that you get from the school committee?
Correct. That's the latest number that we have from them. We're expecting to hear more from them at their coming meeting this Tuesday, I think, is when we're supposed to get an update on their on their budget projection.
And how confident are we? Because in the past, they've had what they call the gap, which starts huge, and then at the end, it's not that big. How confident are we of that the gap is the same thing, huge, but then at the end is not that big?
I may need Chaz or Melissa to weigh in on.
They have been refining their projections over the past couple of years, and I think that they have a higher level of confidence about what they're putting out there. I think that Susan has done a lot of work identifying where the structural gap is coming from, and I think she does have a higher level of confidence about her projections as well.
Okay, so the gap is more accurate now.
I believe
Thank
so.
you.
That's our understanding. Thanks, Melissa. Appreciate that. So let's talk about the town school split. There's a lot of numbers here, so try to follow me. If you go down the FY27 column with me, we have estimated that there's $436 million available in FY27 revenue to be allocated. We first take the above the line costs, also known as the non-departmental fixed costs, out of that revenue, which is $195 million. This includes things like benefits and pensions and OPEBs, special appropriations and non-appropriated, and you're left with the total available that can be allocated to the budgets of the town and the schools. That's $241 million. We then take the prior year percentage split. So we're taking the numbers at the bottom of the left column, the 40.9% and the 51.9%, and apply that to the 241 million. This gives us what should be the new sort of allocation for each side, but we then need to do what's called adjustments for costs for shared services. And so, for example, in FY26, there was an adjustment of money from the town side to the school side. This was because the schools chose to cut their repair and maintenance line item, which lives in the town budget. And so in order to give them back that money, we had to cut it from the building department and adjust it back to the other side of the split here in what is called the below the line adjustments. In FY27, we have $500,000 shifting from the town to the schools to account for significant increases in utility costs, which have been known, and we provided these numbers right here, this $500,000 to the school department as part of their planning. After making that $500,000 adjustment from the town over to the schools to pay for utilities, we're left with a new allocation of $99 million for the town, $141 million, almost $142 million for the schools, and a new percentage split at the bottom, which will get applied to the next year. And I see I have a few questions, so I'm not sure who was first.
Charlie, I think I was, and it has to do with the adjustment that was made last year for the repair and maintenance for the schools. How did you account for that for fiscal year 27? Did you did you continue to penalize, or did you use the percentages with that reduction?
The cuts were
Melissa
not
made it.
restored. The cuts were not restored.
So we wait for instruction on this from the school department on how they would like us to move these line items. And so without instruction from them, we're assuming 2.5% growth in repair and maintenance, which is something that was added in a 2008 override to occur annually. So that's all we've assumed for now until we hear more from the schools.
I just am concerned that, you know, that was done, there was some trade-offs there. You cut a CIP project as sort of compensation, a school CIP project as compensation for those operating funds being taken away from the building department. And as Carlos pointed out earlier, there's some significant deferred maintenance on the Runkle School building. And I think by allowing the schools to perpetuate that continued, if you're starting off with that cut being perpetuated, I think we're just digging a bigger and bigger hole. That was a one-time agreement, not, I don't recall that being an agreement to make that a perpetual new base.
Yeah, Charlie has provided a memo to the school committee, to the school superintendent, advocating for restoration of the funds. So we need them to be able to react to his memo and talk about it at the town school partnership as well.
Can't wait.
Was there another question?
Yes. Regarding the utilities, do we have, I mean, is this like new buildings using more energy, old buildings using more energy?
Great question, Carlos. And it is strictly an increase in utility price from one year to the next. We have fixed price supply contracts that typically run 3 to 5 years. We've been benefiting from a great rate for the past few years that has been substantially lower than what many other municipalities are paying. We just locked in what we think is a great rate for the next few years, but it is resulting in a significant increase in FY27 in both electricity and natural gas as we catch up to the market. As a lot of folks have seen their home bills rise. That's what we're witnessing at the town level as well. Just to be totally clear, I have the FY27 school utility budget that I'm talking about with this school finance subcommittee tomorrow night. We are budgeting for some increase in kilowatt hours, but it is not the primary driver. We're budgeting for some increase in therms. And some of that is, you know, it's difficult to piece out how much of that is just new buildings using more energy versus colder winter. But most of the increase you're seeing, I would say a substantial amount of it is this jump in price. So for example, we're going from around 150 per therm or 140 per therm to 170 per therm for natural gas. And electricity is going up from 23 cents per kilowatt hour to 27 cents per kilowatt hour. That's the whole price, includes both supply and utility. And those are, you know, 10% and greater increases. And so a 10% increase in a $4 million utility budget would be pretty substantial. That would be about the magnitude that we're talking about here.
Thank you. I would also urge that we look at energy conservation. Again, I'm not the only one who has to take off a sweater or everything, you know, like, when you're in a school, because it's so hot in there, and it's just ridiculous sometimes. So I don't know. I mean,
we have had this conversation at Town School Partnership too. We've even had school folks ask Charlie Simmons, you know, can we do a program to reduce energy use? Now, I will just caution, Carlos, that my personal experience having done green communities reporting in my last community is that buildings are using more energy every year because they have more security systems, more technical HVAC systems. They have more, they're packed with more servers, more network equipment, et cetera. So that is something that's very difficult to battle. Charlie Simmons has a great program for demand load shedding. In some departments, we actually see a unit price that is lower than what we expect to pay because we're doing such a great job shedding demand load. And we have some new net metering agreements that we're hoping will help bring these costs down. You know, this increase in utilities is really not something we could have avoided. This is something that the broader market is seeing across
Yes, we
the
should
board.
plan for, as we bring in new buildings, we should plan for the increase, as you said, because they're more complicated.
And just to add to that, Carlos, thank you for bringing that up. Charlie did provide a memo as well to school committee talking about the costs we're going to see in FY28 as a result of Pierce coming online. And it is going to be an expensive building to operate at when it starts. So we are starting to have those conversations earlier on in the process.
Thank you.
Any other town school split questions? Okay, so we're going to talk about benefits. We'll talk about some of the specific categories of benefits, but this is a high level of basically that benefits portion of those fixed costs at the top of the town school split. So overall, a 9.5 million or 10% increase. We're assuming 12% growth for group health for FY27 to 29. We're getting back on our schedule for funding OPEBs, and pensions are remaining on schedule as well. Next slide. So we'll get into the major accounts here. So under health insurance, again, we're assuming a 12% rate increase, and we're assuming 45 new subscribers across town and schools. Just want to note, this is not addition of FTEs. This is assumptions for folks coming on board who are going to need health plans. And then, you know, so for a total increase of 5.6 million. Melissa notes here very aptly that each 1% increase in health insurance is $400,000. For pensions, we're looking at about an increase of $3 million based on our funding schedule. The annual appropriation is increasing by 7.85%, which you'll see on a later chart is growing. That 7.85% is getting larger as a dollar amount as we get closer to the end of the funding schedule, which is putting more pressure on the budget each year as we approach FY30. And then other post-employment benefits are, you know, $5 million, and we have at different times paused this funding schedule. This $250,000 annual increase. And we've resumed it in FY23, paused it again in FY26, and it is being considered again for FY27 to help us close the gap. Just want to note that we're continuing to assess our special revenue funds. So this is our group health appropriation over a long term. You can see that there's a slight dip when we join the GIC, but it continues to ratchet up each year over year as we assume 12% increases. This is just a closer look at OPEBs, which, you know, as again, we're assessing our special revenue funds. Those are our enterprise funds for their OPEB costs. We're using what runoff we can for OPEBs, and this is basically just showing you the $250,000 increase. So this is the pension funding chart I was talking about that's showing the total dollar amount growing year over year and putting a higher amount of pressure on the budget because it's as a percentage, it's growing. The full funding date is 2030. We're assuming a slightly lower rate of return, and the total increase in FY27 is about 3 million. So this is something Melissa alluded to earlier. We wanted to show folks the amount of the property tax levy, the 2.5% increase in the property tax levy that is being consumed by benefits. And so these are year over year numbers. And what we're showing you here is that in FY27, this is the first year that we know of on record where the growth in benefits costs is more than 100% of what we get out of the Prop 2.5 levy increase. So the benefits, you know, increases are significant, and they're really consuming most of the new revenue that we have to work with in the budget. And that grows year over year to 120% of the property tax levy increase in 2029. So this is a quick look at debt service in the CIP. We don't have the CIP ready for you yet, but we just want to note that all years of the forecast are following the CIP policies, including getting back to the 6.6% of operating budget funds in the CIP. We reverted to 6% in FY26, the current year. And then in FY27, we do have new debt service, as I mentioned, for roof repairs, Pierce, and fire renovations. And we note here that Alston Settlement is funded within the debt service budget. In the out years, we have debt service supporting things like Lars Anderson Park, Davis Path Footbridge, and Washington Street Complete Streets. So this is your non-appropriated expenses. These are the assessments from the state and county that come right out of your state aid appropriation before you get your state aid. And so we're assuming basically modest increases here. And this is something we don't have control over. But things like county assessments, those come right out of our state aid before we get that money. Oh, this is I believe my last slide. And so what we're trying to show you folks here is what's called the structural deficit. And we've had lots of people say to us, this is not a deficit because we're talking about future years here, but a structural deficit is when you are projecting your expenses will grow faster than your revenues are growing. And so this is a future unresolved deficit at present service levels. And while we have found efficiencies to address in prior years and come into balance, this projection suggests that real service reductions will be needed if we can't come up with more revenue. So, as you can see, we're showing both regular projected annual growth and cumulative growth. And through the out years, expenditures continue to rise at a significant level. And as out to 2029, they're at 21% higher, and revenues only at 11.6%. So this is the structural deficit that you keep hearing about. Okay, I'll turn it back to Chaz this time, I think, to close us out.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. And thanks to you all. I know we're past the 9 o'clock hour here. Carol Levin asks in the chat, how many more years of the Alston settlement? Melissa, do we know?
Let me look it up and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. All right. Now we're talking about the work that's being conducted at the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee and in our shop regarding how to close the town's deficit for FY27 and beyond. As you know, with the possibility of an override, we are basically composing two budgets, one for an override scenario, one for a no override scenario. In either case, we will be making reductions on our end in order to close the gap in FY27 so that we do not go to the voters with an ask to cover 100% of that dollar amount. We are going to endeavor to do our best. I will say that in the years since the 2023 override, we have had to make reductions every year. And that's because of the items that we've talked about here that you all know about, the rising, higher than expected healthcare costs, the rising cost of doing business, the need to enter into competitive collective bargaining agreements, particularly with the public safety unions that have the ability to go to arbitration and potentially get deals even better than we could possibly afford to pay. All of that factored into the need to make reductions, realize efficiencies, raise fees and rates where appropriate, and so forth. So we're doing that again this year, regardless of whether or not an override is put on the ballot and regardless of whether or not it passes. That's the recommendation that's going to be in the budget book. The recommendation here would be to level fund OPEBs, which would result in $100,000 worth of savings on the town side, reduce the CIP contribution down to 6%. That's around $2 million that would be split between the town and the schools. We will revisit some of the override commitments in the prior override commitments in the event of a no override scenario. I will be very clear that we have no intention of cutting these programs. In fact, we would like to enhance them wherever possible. We are already looking, we have now many good years of data from the Rodent Control Action Plan. We actually want to improve on that. I'm talking to Health and DPW about how we're going to do that in the coming year. But the reality of the situation is some of these things were the last things that were put into the budget. And so unfortunately, in terms of operational stability, they would be the first things to come out of the budget. And so I don't want to lose planning capacity. I don't want to lose the additional inspector we brought on for short-term rental monitoring. I don't want to lose rodent control. But those are the kinds of things that, as Melissa said, if we are looking at how to reduce services, and those are the services that we would be most likely to reduce. So currently we're looking at a reduction of 4 positions, even in a override scenario. Those reductions would be made largely through either positions that are open or positions that can be moved to soft money. There's a position in the health department that could be moved onto the opiate settlement fund. There's a position in rec that could be moved to rec revolving. Again, I don't like having positions indefinitely on soft money. Don't think it's good policy long term, but I think in terms of the sources of soft money that we have available, those are as strong as they get. And it's doable in a long-term perspective there. Like I said,
Chaz, we have a couple of questions
Sure.
pending now. Cliff and then Carlos.
Yeah, thanks. It's probably as much a comment as it is a question. I don't get the logic of a FIFO approach, or LIFO approach, I should say, to this analysis. It makes no sense to me. Nor does it make any sense to me to potentially be reducing resources in areas that have the capacity to increase revenue for the town over the intermediate to long term. That just seems nonsensical. Can you give me the logic behind those?
Sure.
Behind that?
There's not a lot else to cut, Cliff. There's just.
But that's like cutting. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face. I mean,
let's talk about it from the planning perspective. I agree. I don't think it makes sense economically to cut planning capacity. But if the community is not interested in looking at economic development as a way out of this, then what are we doing spending our money on it?
So hold on a second. How do you reach that conclusion?
I haven't reached that conclusion. What I'm saying is, if there is,
how would you? I mean, how would you reach that conclusion?
I would take a look at whether or not I would take a look at whether or not Chestnut Hill West passes. That would be the big leading indicator to me, would be whether or not the community is willing to make compromises with itself in order to get to a good result on this. Now, it's possible that, like I said, and I'm not saying, the plan, there is no current plan on the table. They're working on it still. The rezoning is being worked on, and it's going to be worked on and revised, I am sure, through the town meeting process, including from this committee. I'm sure is going to have significant input and is going to make that a better process. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the question will be, does the community want the money?
Let me just understand this. The override vote's going to be before town meeting.
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to have to make these choices as a result of the override vote.
Yes.
And you're going to hold them in abeyance until what happens at town meeting several weeks later?
That's part of it. Yeah. I mean, right. When communities that have had failed override votes tend to build out contingencies in the event of a no override scenario at town meeting. And what often happens in those circumstances is that the budget is held until votes are taken to figure out how they want to defray the cost. So we could have those, in the event of a no override scenario, we can absolutely have those discussions, and we can talk about the priorities, right?
Yeah, and so the conclusion would be, let's focus on planning. The conclusion would be that if town meeting doesn't, there's a proposal for Chestnut Hill West in front of town meeting, requires a 2/3 vote, and the specific proposal that is in front of town meeting doesn't pass. The conclusion you reach is that the community doesn't want economic development?
No, I mean, again, that's an indicator.
It's not supporting that specific development? Again,
there's not just that specific development, right? It's the overarching question of what can we afford?
If you're using that vote, and you said that's what you're going to do, you're going to use that vote as the proxy for the community's perspective on overall economic development. That makes no sense. I'm sorry.
And let's have that conversation. I think it's really important to have that conversation about where the priorities are, right? These are the initial recommendations, but it is ultimately the advisory committee's budget. And I need your feedback in order to make the right choices here. So I want to be very cognizant of that, and I appreciate the feedback that you're giving me on this. I don't like the idea any more than you do, but I also don't see a lot of good options in the event that we have to close a $2.9 million gap. I just don't. Unless you want to start talking about cutting public safety, and there is not an appetite in the community to cut public safety either. I'm sorry, I see there are questions and comments that Dennis wants to get to.
Yeah, Carlos.
Yes, I had a question, but actually, Cliff brought up a great point, which I'm just going to add a comment question. I mean, so yesterday was the last, what turns out to be the last meeting for the Chestnut Hill Advisory Committee. I didn't know it was the last meeting until halfway through the meeting yesterday, but and I would say that even though I'm very much in favor of economic development, I don't think that what's going to be proposed is the right thing. And that doesn't mean that I'm not in favor of economic development. I just think that the approach and the process and et cetera for that project or for that committee that was not allowed to vote up or down what is going to be proposed is the right approach or the right solution for that location or in general. So I would follow Cliff's warning very seriously, because I think the Chestnut Hill project has many issues. Anyway, my question was, how many staff members, or how much staff is funded by one-time monies or grants that are expiring?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but we do have that information, so
Yeah,
I
can put that in the chat for you, Carlos. It's in the budget. It's in the financial plan under section 2. There's a page that goes into FTEs, has all the departments, and it breaks out how much are being covered by grants.
And why do we keep on doing that?
Well, so not all soft money is created equal, right? For example, we really try and avoid putting positions on things like ARPA that we know is expiring this year, and we knew when we got it was expiring in a very short, period of time. So really, the only positions that we put on ARPA were things that we were, managing ARPA-related projects. By contrast, and when we knew that these funds were winding down, we made movement to get those positions off. In fact, one of the benefits of the last override was that we were able to wean ourselves off of marijuana dollars, which was a big benefit to the town, because there were positions that were funded by a source of money that was rapidly drying up. And so, when I think of why do we keep doing that, some forms of soft money are more sustainable than others. Rec revolving is a more sustainable fund option than ARPA. Opiate settlement funds are going to be
right, but we established a whole new division through an anonymous grant, and shouldn't we have waited to have that money in operating rather than establish something, especially when it's complete, like we don't even know where the money came from?
So I think that was a question of community priorities, right? The sustainability function was previously in planning and was one person. The desire for sustainability services was not being met by that position, and the need to particularly capitalize on the then quite favorable environment in terms of federal and state availability of funding for sustainability operations meant that we really had to think strategically about how do we want to move on this, and do we think that it's a cost the community is willing to bear? And that is an open question here. You'll notice that sustainability is not on the block here, because the feedback we've gotten from the select board is that sustainability is critically important. And frankly, the operational benefit that we've seen from the division, even as it's getting up and running, has been significant. We're able now to make a significant investment in renewable energy in the CIP for solar power. We would not have been able to make. We wouldn't even be close if we didn't have Alexandra and her team working on it with the community, with ZAB, with some of the members of NRSC and elsewhere. The work that team has done is really remarkable, and it's going to result in significant benefits to the community. So sustainability is an interesting, is a unique scenario in that we had an opportunity, the environment seemed right, and the community desire was so strong. But yes, in an ideal world, right, you would say that's something that we want to sustain, no pun intended, long term. And so we need to think about how we're going to do that. And we did, and we said when we accepted that money and we talked about setting up the sustainability division, we were very clear-eyed with the community and saying, this is only good for 3 years. This is the opportunity to prove this out. And if the community doesn't think it's worth the money, then there is the risk of it going away. And we're willing to say that. But I think you can, and I hope you will agree. But I want to have the conversation and make you and ensure that you're comfortable with it. I think the work that the Sustainability Division has done thus far really proves their value, not just from a ecological perspective, but from an economic perspective. So as we go through this budget process, sustainability is a success story that we want to highlight and talk about how important that work is going forward.
Great, thank you.
So we're talking here a little bit about the potential contours of an override, what that might look like. And you can see here there are sort of tiers. I will say this is not set in stone. We continue to have the discussions about what this looks like at expenditures and revenues with the select board. That process will go through to March, and there will ultimately be a decision on what is on the ballot, what number that is, and what it will fund. And that is part of a dialogue and discussion that's beginning here and will continue through the next several months. When we talk about continuity of service, again, you see that $2.9 million ask. We'll talk a little bit more on the next slide about why that allotted number is only 1.35 million and how we're closing the gap. Otherwise, there's money for the fire contract. That's that tail that Charlie talked about beginning in FY28 in order to pay for the sort of phantom fourth year of that contract. Overtime adjustments, again, talking about wanting to avoid going to the reserve fund going forward. Those conversations you had with the chief earlier, that's money for the fire department in order to ensure that our overtime budget is trued up to what we're seeing, the actual numbers that we're seeing. DPW, again, covers sustainability, but it also covers tree protection and horticulture, with things that were reduced in 2020 that were never restored. And you can see there, even there, we're not able to fund the full amount of things that the department would like. But at least there we're funding critical programs that the community has voted for, said that they wanted, and is willing to pay for it. Tree protection, sustainability, and again, the general health of the planted environment. Restoring 6 police officers, those are the positions that have been held open as a result of paying for the police contract settlement that got us out of civil service. We are largely at full employment. We're starting to see the benefits of the non-civil service promotion process. We just made some promotions in the command staff. The chief is very happy with the team that she has around her. I mean, I'll let her speak for herself. I think it's great, the current team that's in place, doing excellent work. But the reality of the situation is there's 6 officers short of their full complement, and 6 officers will be of significant benefit in terms of the police overtime, which is not where the fire overtime is, but is still a concern to us, and it's something that we need to keep track of. Adding money to the collective bargaining reserve, we will be in the last year. We are in the last year of our contracts with the public safety unions going forward. We are trying to settle contracts with AFSCME and other smaller organizations currently for the next couple of years, thinking about collective bargaining. I know that this was something that was intentionally left out of the 2022 override, and there were comments made, including by members of this committee, about what are we doing to ensure that we're covering collective bargaining. As you know, there's a tough balance there between, do we put the money in with the knowledge that then people know it's there, or do we try and continue to live within the means of the tax increases that we're able to provide. And in analyzing where we are and where we think we'll be in the next 3-year cycle, adding $400,000 to the collective bargaining reserve, I think, is a fair compromise in terms of figuring out how to balance those competing issues when it comes to, we know we're going to need to pay for new contracts, but we also don't want to pay for contracts that go above and beyond what we're capable of funding. The Senior Center Transportation Program. This is a really critical issue. It's critical for the select board. It's critical for us. This is an ARPA-funded project. It was always a pilot project, but it is we know it is extremely important to the community. And it's really important to figure out how to fund it. I understand that in the past there were people raised concerns about the TLC money and how that's being spent, but I would just want to reinforce to folks, that's a different pot of money than what funds the medical transportation program and the senior center transportation program. There's not enough money in that pot to fund the program. It's only $140,000, I believe. It funds a different transportation program. It's also important, but it's separate. The program that people are concerned about going away is a program that has always been ARPA funded. And so when we talk about things that the community wants to preserve from the ARPA process, this is one of those things. And so we're making that ask because of the community feedback we've received about how successful that program is and how much people want it to continue. And then some operating adjustments on the police side. With the new contract, the command staff now do not make significantly more money than the lieutenants in the union. And so there needs to be an adjustment there in order to bring that pay scale up to where it needs to be and encourage people to seek leadership positions in the department. There also needs to just be upgrades to certain systems, and the cost of licenses will continue to rise. And so increasing the police budget by covering those will be important. And so that's where those numbers are. Within all that yellow, that gets you to around $5.3 million. That is adjusted for inflation, the same amount as was on the ballot in 2022. Unlike in 2023. Unlike in 2023, there are no new programs. There's nothing that we are building in. There is funding for unfunded mandates. There is funding for things that we are trying to true up. But this is not a new things override proposal. It is a basic operations override proposal. And so that is what is in the yellow there. The items in orange and red, I don't want to get into too much, but there are other items that people have talked about and that they want to focus on, including, again, additional money for roads, always a critical ask, especially as the cost has gone up. But I also want to give time for the DPW's pavement management plan, the new pavement management plan, to go into effect. We're already hearing positive feedback from the community about how things are picking up because we're doing more regular repair and maintenance and less transformative repair and maintenance, that people are seeing the changes there. People are seeing the benefits in terms of increased work on sidewalks. The installation of the warning lights in Brookline Village is new. There's a lot of positive changes that are being made there. And rather than immediately say, well, maybe we should put more money into this, I think it's prudent for us to see how the benefits of that shake out. And so that's kind of where that is. And I can talk, for example, again, we have a budget analyst position that's ARPA funded in the select board. That's one of the BFAC goals, was to have more long range budget capacity. If we were to do that, that's what that cost would be. But again, at this juncture, the items in yellow are really where our focus is. We're not focused on those new items unless we receive feedback from you, the select board, and ENRSC about differences there. How are we going to pay for the continuity of service? That gap, again, $2.9 million. the cuts that we will make, even in a yes override scenario, will total around $1.48 million on the town side. We will also see, we believe we will see an increase in revenue, which I'll talk about on the next slides. And then the remainder of that would be spent on the override. That leaves an additional in the $237,000 for stabilization purposes, override stabilization purposes, which I want to talk about again in the next couple slides. Revenue opportunities. We're still finalizing these, but you can see here the single biggest one is parking violation fee increases. We are looking at increasing those by $10 for the 4 most common parking violations. The initial estimate of the police department is that if we were to do that, we'd bring in around $900,000. You would see on the previous page that one of the things that was an ask of DPW is to modernize parking meter operations. We would take, or the proposal would be to take that money out of this bucket, use that for the modernization purposes, because it's funding the same operations, run the rest of it through the town school split, and assume that you would see increased compliance as a result of higher fines. And so you would only really realize a set percentage of that. That leaves on the town side after the split around $260,000. The others here are smaller, but not insignificant. The building permit fee hasn't increased in a while. Our building commissioner thinks that it is possible to do so, and 5% would be reasonable. I will say our fees are high, and we always want to be cognizant of the fact that fees are not intended to be a revenue source, right? They are intended to pay for the work that we do. But I will say that the complexity of the work that the building department does in this community does command a high fee. And so we think it's reasonable to look at a 5% increase there, given the costs to the building department of the work that they do. And then the other items are much smaller. Short-term rental fees, ZBA preservation fee increases, increasing those by 10%, only nets you around $5,000 based on the number of applications we see. But it's not nothing. And so that gets on the town side to around $354,000. So we're looking at potential cuts even in a yes override scenario. A position in the fire department, a position in the health department moving over to opioid settlement. There's an HR position that's vacant that we will not fill. There's services money in the HR department that we would cut. There's a planning position that's open that we would cut. There are police overtime we would be able to reduce somewhat, just based on the actuals that we're currently seeing, and the reality that we have a couple of folks on military leave who will be coming back, so we can make a minor reduction there. Moving a rec position to rec revolving, cutting the select board services budget. Again, that's a tough one for us. We do use that money and it's tight every year, but if we're cutting other departments, we want to be judicious and fair and look at our own budget. So that's what we would do there. OPEB's level funding and the CIP, as we talked about. The benefits that you accrue from those reductions is roughly $45,000. So at the end of the day, you would see reductions of almost 1.5 million, even in a yes override scenario. In a no override scenario, you're looking at a lot more. I don't want to go down this whole list, but you can see obviously that we would be, cutting wherever we could. And that gets us to around 2.5 million currently. So we're still around $400,000 short. We'd be looking probably at additional reductions. And I do want to say that would be significantly worsened in FY28 with the fire department tail. You would be looking at least as many reductions in FY28 of personnel in order to make up that gap. The reason why that's not on here is because that's a year out. And I don't know in a no override scenario whether the community would want to have that conversation about putting something smaller on the ballot or thinking about alternatives. But the reality would be, in the absence of action, FY28 would be as bad in terms of reductions to operational capacity. And that's it on that end. Thank you all for your patience and attention here. I know it's a long presentation, but we're happy to take any questions you have.
I think there were a couple of that we skipped over in the chat. Janice.
Yes, thanks, Dennis. And thank you, Ches, for your presentation. So as you've talked, I have even now additional comments. So one is that as a person who pays property taxes in Brookline, we talk about the shorthand is that the idea of passing overrides every 3 years, but we borrow every year towards that. So in effect, it's an override every year for property taxpayers. That's just how it feels. That's how it looks on our property taxes. And so it's experienced differently. And the last override, I believe, was 11.2 million. Was that, am I
Almost
remembering?
12, 11.98.
11.98, so even higher. And right, so divided by 3, that's almost it's like a $4 million override every year is what we as taxpayers are experiencing. And that's significant because you talked about resiliency being an important issue in the town. And the other important goal is, because I'm on the comp plan also, steering committee, is affordable housing. And one thing that passing these overrides does is makes Brookline ever more unaffordable. It pushes up rents, it pushes up the cost of housing, it destabilizes the population of Brookline because then people can't afford to stay here who would like to be able to have a longer term commitment to the town. And so I've been thinking about this issue. Clearly, you know, we have a structural deficit. I'm not blind to that. But I think that we do things in Brookline that makes us more expensive to provide services. So I'll give you just one example. In fact, one I wrote to you about is that I believe that there's a lot of redundancy in this town because we tend to silo departments. Every department has its community engagement person. Every department has all the things that maybe we could do more efficiently and actually more effectively. I think personally that if there was a community engagement person at the administration level who really understood all of what was happening in the town, we'd actually get better community engagement, because as it is, we get hit with surveys nonstop from all these different departments and all these different programs, and people are not feeling engaged, which is the biggest problem, is that it leads actually to less community engagement. And I see it as like a PCP, that there's a person that knows what's going on. There are specialists all over, but there needs to be one person who really understands the big picture. And I think we need to rethink exactly how, how we meet the service needs in this town in a more thoughtful way. So I'm very, I think siloing also prevents, I know more about the city of Newton than I do about Brookline, because they put it together and then they send out notices that lets me know everything that's happening in Newton. But I don't have that in Brookline because every department is so independent. So that's one thing. And I don't know what to do about these costs. I want to say I'm also on the Chestnut Hill commercial area study, and I will say that the neighborhood, it is my neighborhood. We want development in our commercial area. We want a vibrant commercial area. But what happened was that it's an incomplete process. And as a result, the zoning that's coming to town meeting, in my view, is incomplete, and therefore there are problems. And I know that I don't want to take time up now to talk about it, but I hope that during the discussions that happen about it, it will become clearer that in fact we may be diminishing the economic value of the commercial area in Chestnut Hill if we go the route that is currently evolving and going to be presented to town meeting. So I hope that we have some good, productive, helpful conversations on that. And my final thing is that I am completely amazed at the volunteers who join committees in town, that we have a level of expertise that we could not afford anywhere. And I think that also that we can have our committees do more valuable work for the town. They're willing to spend the time, and I am so grateful for those who do step up and volunteer. And that's my comments. Thank you.
Harry Bors.
Thanks. I actually had a couple questions, one specific, one broader. I'll just throw them out and whoever needs to answer them can. First, I want to make a comment though, and that's on the annual increase in benefits. And I was quite struck by that slide and that the cost and benefits are sopping up that 2.5% levy. That's a very powerful slide. It says a lot. I think those of us who have been here even for a little while understand that our split with employees, we give the most toward healthcare benefits compared to any other municipality, which is nice. And I think particularly in certain groups, we also pay pretty well too, which I think is great also. But boy, if we're talking about potentially reducing FTEs and not looking at things like a more equitable split and things like benefits, I think that's to everybody's detriment. So that's just my comment on that, but very powerful slide. My question is, looking at the override potential contours, what I see missing is anything about the schools. I'm assuming that's because they haven't said what their thoughts are yet, or perhaps haven't gotten a number. I know right now, fairly or unfairly, they're grappling with a little bit of a credibility gap within the community for a variety of reasons. Not the best press. It wasn't that long ago that people weren't getting paid and we were being sued. In fairness, we also had bills that weren't getting paid on the town side this past year. So I'm just sort of curious as to what you have heard or what you might anticipate coming from the schools in terms of an override. And then my broader question, which sort of related to that and recalling this past year's budget process and some of the bills that didn't get paid, is earlier last year when we were considering this, and at A&F subcommittee also, we'd asked about the audit last year, and I remember asking for that, I don't know, a number of times. As I recall, there was something with the auditors. It was late. I didn't hear anything after that. So we really didn't have the benefit of it in last year's, going through last year's budget. And I'm curious if it actually did get done, if we're going to have it for this budget cycle, or where that may stand. And maybe it was, I don't know. And if so, I'd be curious when. So that's just a broader question, but I'm also curious about what the schools are thinking in terms of an override. Thank
Sure. Thanks. I'll take the issues in order. The split, I think everyone agrees that is something that needs to be looked at. I think the predominant issue there is because of the way that we got into the GIC. In order to change that number, we need a weighted majority of the unions involved to say yes. We're having those conversations. We are taking them seriously. I want to move forward with that in a productive way that emphasizes to everyone, to your point, Harry, right? If the alternative is losing people, we should consider very strongly what that benefit is. Because of the way that the deficits are structured, it's not a silver bullet, but there is no silver bullet, right? It's got to be a yes and situation in terms of how we address these issues. Right now we're at 83-17 in terms of the healthcare split. The town pays 83% of health benefits. In most cases, there are a couple of plans that are slightly different, but it's not the vast majority of the situation. And then the employees pay the other 17%. We've done a rough back of the envelope calculation. Every percentage that shifts brings in roughly $400,000 in revenue to the town. And it decreases the take-home pay of an employee by roughly $5 a pay period on average. Now that adds up, and there are employees for whom that would be significant. So I don't want to minimize that. But again, so you think about $400,000, roughly a little more than that for every percentage point. So if we get down to 80-20, that's 1.2 million. That has to run through the split, because that would, accrue to both the town and the schools. So that's good. But that alone is not going to get us to where we need to be to close the gap. Even 75-25 wouldn't get us there. Certainly not on the school side. So yes, that is a lever that I hope we can pull together by working with our labor team and making sure that everyone's on the same page. And again, I hope to have more conversations about that in the near future. The schools, right? We don't have insight into where. So, we don't want to speak for them in terms of where they are. The superintendent on the 18th of December made a presentation to the school committee preliminarily talking about some of the reductions that she is intending to make to help close that gap. And that those reductions combined with some of the things that we're proposing are hopefully going to bring that gap down and that ultimate override ask down. Where we still don't have visibility is where the schools are in FY28 and 29, and what their needs are there and how the reductions that they're making are going to impact those numbers. So based on the superintendent's presentation on the 18th last month, it looks like when you factor in their cuts, our cuts, they might be able to bring that number down to between $7 and $8 million for FY27. But they're still working on it. I anticipate that we'll hear more from the superintendent in the next 2 weeks.
But you do expect them to come forward with a number to say, in addition to what you have here, some number X that they come up with saying this is what we need in order to cover their XYZ.
Yes, I anticipate having that number in the next 2 weeks.
Yep. Okay.
And then your last question is about the audit, where the audit is. We've seen a massive consolidation in terms of audit firms, and now our auditor got bought twice in the last year, and that really led to a lot of delays and issues. I will also say, frankly, the issue with the schools and the issue with the potential deficit that was able to close in FY25, thanks to the work that they did, and then the $8.2 million gap that was identified that led to the CLA being brought in to assess that problem. It resulted in a lot more questions and a lot more need for diligence in terms of even getting the FY24 audit completed. So we will have more information than we did last year, but it's been tough, and we are not the only community that has seen this problem in terms of just a huge backlog when it comes to the audit firm being responsive and getting back to us. But
So
speaking
did-
of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So is last year's audit done, or we're still waiting for that to get
Still
done?
waiting for it.
So we don't even have it a year later.
We have rough financials, and we've given them to Moody's. We don't have the audit.
And that's true of the other municipalities now too. They're a year behind.
There's about we've been in touch with, I don't know, what is it, Melissa, like 20? We've got a long list. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure Moody's will be happy.
They're not.
Okay.
But we're again, we have a good relationship with them, and they understand that we're not alone in this. So we're giving them everything we can to be transparent with them.
Okay, do we have any idea when last year's audit might get done this year?
You're saying
Boy, I don't know.
fiscal year 25?
Well, I thought it was that last year we were supposed to have had one in the beginning of last year.
That was our hope and expectation. Yes.
Yeah. Do we have any idea when it may be done, if we're going to get it this year?
For fiscal 24, we are in frequent, constant contact with them. The good news is that they have finally stopped asking questions, and we believe that they are in fact almost done.
Okay. All right. Well, to be determined, I guess. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Kelly, you had a two finger?
Sure, if you don't mind, I just want to go back to Harry's question on benefits a bit before moving on. So Chaz, thanks for really talking about the split between town and employee. But I guess over the last several years, as I've been looking at this number for group health go up and up, one of the questions that I have is, why are we still in GIC? I mean, are we still getting value from it? My understanding is that there are really only 39 cities and towns left participating in the GIC. And as of last year, I guess 2024, sorry, 6 more have left. And so I am, I'm curious about what other options the town might be looking to explore at this time, because it is an ever increasing cost. And again, there are no, excuse me, no high deductible plans that are offered in order to give employees flexibility.
So that's a great question. And I think the unfortunate reality is GIC, we have asked our health consultant, we do this analysis every 2 years because it's a 2-year period that, thinking about if you want to leave, you have to tell them. And then, if you don't tell them, then you're in for another 2 years. So we've done that analysis. I will say a couple of things. The other health consortiums out there are in even worse shape than GIC is. And in fact, many of their members are fleeing back to GIC. So yes, you had people leave GIC last year. Now you have people struggling to get in because at least those increases that GIC is experiencing are not as bad as the increases that Maya is experiencing, or the Western Mass Collective out there, whose name I'm not remembering right now. Maya's numbers are closer to 19% on average. And some of the communities that are insured by one insurer, that have individual deals with Blue Cross, are seeing comparable bad numbers. It's rough all the way down. And so, I have my graveyard humor joke about this is, I know whether or not we're getting a good deal because the healthcare reps at the Massachusetts Municipal Association conference don't come up to me. They don't even try to convince me to switch to them because they know they can't offer a better deal than what we have now.
Interesting, because I think some of the initial press on Maya was that municipalities with younger, healthier staff were actually leaving the GIC to go there. And so part of me would have expected that they would have seen lower increases. But certainly also, I understand GLP-1 drugs have caused a fair amount of that increase. And so would love to, would love to understand what our claim data looks like, and if there's any way that we can potentially do better than what we've got in the GIC, because there are other options out there besides Maya and whatever it is out in Western Mass.
Yeah, we can certainly have Pat talk about that. And,
Great.
we do that due diligence. And I will say, yeah, I think if we saw something out there, we would absolutely take it to this body and the select board and talk about it.
I certainly understand what a big challenge it is, because it's also difficult in terms of private industry. I think pretty much every corporation out there is struggling with this as well. So it is a universal problem, not unique to Brookline.
All right, Elise?
Hi, I'm trying to get my camera going. There it is. Okay, so I guess with respect to the possible override, I'm curious how these underlying assumptions, the trade-offs that we talked about and the risks that were presented to us tonight will be clearly communicated to the voters so that they fully comprehend what it is that we're voting on and why this override is on the ballot.
That's a great question. And I want to be clear too, that there are distinctions that need to be made there, which is before a ballot question is finalized and after a ballot question is finalized. And I want to be cognizant of our role as staff about being informative, but not using community resources to advocate for a ballot question once that ballot question is set. I will say in the past, Brookline has done a really good job of developing frequently asked questions page, a page that gives that information. And in fact, that page from the last override is still up. I'll drop it in the chat after we're here so you can see kind of what was done in the past. But we've also looked at other communities. We looked at Melrose, who just passed an override bigger than ours. Ours was previously the biggest override in Massachusetts, the 23 override. Melrose has beat us. Theirs is 13.1, I believe. So, but thank you, Charlie, for dropping that in the chat. I don't know whether or not we're going to be in that realm or not. A lot depends on the schools and where they come down. But the other thing that I do every year is I do a Budget 101 presentation, and I've historically done that online. Actually, and this year I'm going to take the show on the road. I'm actually going to start at the Senior Center, and then I'm going to go to Putterham Library so that we have South Brookline representation. And I'm talking with folks about other places to do it in person. I'm trying to switch up the times that I do it so that people who work can attend, people who don't work can attend. I just want to be out there as much as possible doing the explanatory work of this is how the budget works. Because I know there are a lot of questions out there. People say, well, spend less on consultants. I could say that's a great recommendation. Let me show you how much we spend on consultants. It's not that much.
Yeah.
So that's making sure that we meet the public where they are is really critical in terms of education. So that's my effort this winter is really going to be. I'm going to be out on the road.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are we, oh, Elisa.
Sorry. I actually have several questions, two that I'd asked kind of in the chat. And I know I can get this information somewhere, but I am curious about total personnel that's funded at the school level and at the non-school level for fiscal years 25, 26, 27. Has it been stable across the board? Have there been any major adjustments on any particular in any particular area? The other was regarding capital projects. Is there any kind of funding pot that is anticipated to be used for the rink, which I guess is going to be somewhat large? For pilots, I'm assuming that there's no new good news about anything going on that score. And probably with Hellenic, the sale that's happening, I think that's again something that's not going to bring us any money. Is that correct? Another question I have is about the Chestnut Hill area and commercial development. Is there anything that we could do to make that area more appealing for commercial without adding housing? I know that housing is also something that we're trying to encourage, but it also eats up a lot of the money that we bring in. So I'm just wondering if there's anything at all that we could do to encourage further commercial development there. And finally, I'm just curious to know, are we getting a savings from using geothermal? I think we are at Driscoll, or has the electricity costs gone up so much that it's no longer a benefit? So those are my
So I'll try to tackle the personnel. At this point, our estimate in the forecast for total personnel expenses is 70.9 million. Obviously, that would need to be reduced as we close the gap.
Not numbers. I mean, actual personnel counts.
FTE count. So we did include a link to that above, Elisa, which has the FTEs across a number of years. And we're not adding any FTEs on the town side. In fact, we're proposing reductions of FTEs even in a no override or even in a yes override scenario. And we don't have that data for FY27 from the schools, but the prior years are on that page that I linked above.
And then in terms of pilots, we have not been hearing any noise from new interested parties, although we are, talking about potential opportunities to leverage, potentially if there's some changes around. I think that there might be opportunities to try and ask for additional partners, but at this point, we're not getting a lot of response. I think we're more concerned about making sure that the existing pilot agreements are still steady. BU is our largest, and we did renew that agreement, so that's a really positive sign for the town. And I think that we're also concerned about some of these smaller agreements, particularly with entities like the Coolidge Corner Theater, and other nonprofits that might be struggling under these economic conditions as well. I think that the Hellenic and the commercial development, I'd let Chaz try and tackle.
Yeah, all of the Hellenic properties on the Boston side of the line. We obviously have conversations when those things come up, and we'll have conversations with Hellenic there. I think it's curious to see how that's shaking out. And we'll just keep an eye, and we continue to have an open door with them and have those conversations. We also are building a positive working relationship with BC at Pine Manor, now Messina College, and the efforts that are going on there. As they get more and more settled in their operations, we want to talk about the use of that space and potentially sharing that space with them and sharing our space with them. Those are the big kind of pilot initiatives, but those are not dollar initiatives. Those are facility initiatives. And then now, of course, I've lost the other part of it. Remind me, I'm sorry.
Chestnut Hill.
Chestnut Hill West and commercial development. Yeah, it is a good question, and I think it's all. This is the thing that vexes the planning department, vexes the whole team. I hear that frustration from the committee members who have been working on this. I do. It is not easy, and I think everyone who has been doing work on that has been doing truly yeoman's work, getting us to where we are. Which, to Janice's point, is correct. We're not at the end of the process. We're at the end of the beginning in a lot of ways, and there needs to be more conversations, and there will be a political valence to it that we will just have to kind of talk about. Which is why I want to be clear. I'm not saying we got to pass that plan. I don't think there is a plan. I think we have to see whether or not the ability is there for us as a community to come together and agree on something. What that looks like, I don't know. But I think it will be the subject of the lion's share of conversations that are not about the budget at town meeting this spring. Right now, as I understand it, the overlay that we're talking about requires at least 51% commercial usage in order to use it. And that's the kind of balancing that we're trying to do here is, do we want 100% of nothing, or do we want enough to actually foster that development? And the question of where that line is different to different people. Different people have different views of where that line is or should be in terms of what's going to foster the development and what does the community need, and where is that breaking point? Where is the break-even point where you get some sort of improvement on that land, but you also get what the community wants, which is that commercial growth, and the increased balance there. Your point is well taken, and that's going to be the hot topic this spring. Janice?
Yes, hi. I'd like to just make a couple of comments about the GIC. So I did go to the fall Mass Municipal Association meeting, and I did attend their Taming the Healthcare Budget session, and came away understanding that there is no way to tame the healthcare budget. But they did have, I did ask for specific guidance for Brookline. So one of the things they did say is, they said, do not self-fund, even though we are a community that probably could consider it. Very few municipalities could actually consider it. We're one of them, but the guidance was to avoid self-funding with the risk of unpredictable claims.
Yep.
And to avoid national for-profit carriers. So that was there too. So what it does do is land in the GIS. But their suggestion for us as a municipality, when I asked it, was that every 3 years we should get utilization data from the GIS and have a consultant evaluate that, and to look at the costs with the market. Kelly's absolutely right. GLP-1 costs was a huge driver. There have been other utilization costs have been driving it. There are other drivers too. Using way more outpatient services. It's the way people use healthcare also that drives up the cost. So it's actually making the insurance companies go crazy as well. So we're just part of this very difficult environment.
Yeah. I will say, I think the GIC out of all the consortiums, I think has actually had the most reasonable response. You know, that's just my opinion in terms of the GLP-1 issue, which is, yes, it is a major cost driver. It is also one of the most beneficial things in terms of the long-term health of our employees it's a total game changer for many people's lives. I think we would be remiss if we just said one morning, oh, we're cutting that off. We really need to think strategically about, okay, the benefit now is, well, we don't have to pay for this expensive drug. And if at end of life we're paying and our employees are dying younger of preventable diseases, I don't know if that trade-off is worth it. I think what GIC is proposing doing, which is covering GLP-1s as part of a more comprehensive health and wellness plan and requiring people to comply with, additional, I don't want to say hoops to jump through, but a more comprehensive plan rather than just saying, I'm going to get on the drug and that's going to be it, is going to be beneficial because you're going to see people either comply with those programs and see the benefits and maybe find a lower dose that's a maintenance dose to stay on, or they're going to say, well, that's not for me. And so I think that's a more reasonable approach than just saying we're cutting that drug off.
Is that, I don't want to miss anybody. Are there other questions or comments? Because if not, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Melissa and Charlie and Chaz for spending so much time with us tonight.
And Lincoln.
And Lincoln, sorry.
That's okay.
It's late. Because this is just kicking off the budget process, and this is going to be a difficult one because of the necessity to review multiple budget proposals and alternatives for closing these gaps throughout the course of the next few months. No other questions or comments. Thank you, guys. This was really, really helpful. I don't believe, Harry, I don't believe we have any meeting officially scheduled, though we've been talking about meeting next Tuesday evening to have an update from the ADU subcommittee. I don't look for email from us over the next couple of days if that ends up being scheduled. Was there anything else that we had on our agenda, Harry?
I'm kind of dead to the world, but I don't think so.
Okay, so look, I suspect we're going to have a discussion next Tuesday, an informational update.
Dennis,
yes.
Actually, we talked at some point, although we haven't scheduled it, about getting together with members of the expenditure and revenue.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Because next Monday is a holiday, we have to try to resolve schedule for next week very, very soon. So I'll try to follow up with you, Harry, sometime tomorrow.
Okay.
If that's it, I think we can all go to bed.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night, all. Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
David and Carol, if you're able to stay just for a minute, that would be great.